Hello, everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of millionaire Ben Novak Jr. In 2009, in New York, Ben Novak Jr. was found dead in a hotel room during a business trip. His hands and feet were bound with duct tape, and a gag was stuffed in his mouth. The 53-year-old died from choking on his own blood after an attack in his eye. Get ready. This story has many important details. First, let's learn about the Novak family. Ben Novak Sr. owned the renowned Fontainebleau Hotel, a five-star establishment on the Miami coastline. Born in America in 1907, his father Hyman was a Russian immigrant with the original surname Novik. Hyman initially made clothes and later opened his own store, but it struggled financially. He then became a manager at a New York hotel, where he hired his son, Ben, who had a keen interest in the hotel industry. Ben's career flourished, and by age 40, he had become a successful hotelier with a solid income. He moved to Miami and changed the family name from Novik to Novak. Ben was married 3 times. His first wife, Elsie, was with him for about 15 years. They faced challenges in having children, and when they were both over 40, they adopted a boy named Ronald. Unfortunately, after just 2 years, they divorced. Elsie retained ownership of a prestigious hotel that was registered in her name during their marriage. After the divorce, Ben showed no interest in raising Ronald and did not participate in his life at all. Shortly after the divorce, when 45-year-old Ben Novak started a relationship with 30-year-old model Bernice a year later, in 1952, they formalized their relationship in December 1954. At the age of 47, Ben opened the famous Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, which featured 500 rooms, 12 restaurants, a nightclub, and a luxurious swimming pool. The hotel became a popular vacation spot for current and former U.S. presidents. High-ranking officials and celebrities also performed there. Many films were filmed at this hotel. In 1956, the Novak family welcomed their long-awaited heir, a boy named Ben Novak Jr., who was affectionately called Benji. He grew up on the hotel grounds with his parents and was often surrounded by adults, including celebrities. Hotel security guards primarily took care of him, and from a young age, Benji dreamed of becoming a police officer. Benji was a spoiled child, often making cruel remarks. As he received everything he asked for from the nannies, his parents were usually busy with work. His father was always occupied with business, while his mother frequently worked at the hotel but tried to spend her free time with him. Ben Novak's second marriage ended in divorce, but he maintained a good relationship with his second wife after they divorced. Benji continued to live with his father at the hotel. Ben Novak Sr. later remarried, but his third marriage was short-lived and also ended in divorce. Despite this, he continued to spend time with Bernice, and they remained close for the rest of their lives. In 1978, 24 years after the legendary hotel opened, Ben Novak declared bankruptcy due to the business's financial losses. However, he still had millions remaining in his accounts 7 years later. In 1985, he passed away from cardiopulmonary failure at the age of 78. In his will, he left his entire inheritance to Bernice and his only biological son, Ben Novak Jr. It is important to note that he left only $1 to his adopted son, Ronald, whom he had adopted with his first wife at the time of his father's death. Benji was 29 years old. He had previously worked in the police force but became disillusioned with that childhood dream and decided to start his own business. Those close to him noted that Benji transformed from a spoiled child into a bold and ambitious man, often displaying aggression when things didn't go his way. Much like his father, he explored various business ventures, experiencing both successes and failures. Ultimately, he established a company that organized conferences and conventions for other businesses, with Amway being his largest client for many years. In 1991, Benji lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, at 35. He had been in several relationships until meeting Narcy. Him realized he was truly in love. Narcy, who was from a large family in Cuba. She moved to the U.S. and worked as a dancer in a nightclub. Where she first met Benji, she already had a daughter, May Abad, from an old marriage, who was then raised by Bernice. Although Bernice wasn't fond of Narcy, she chose not to interfere. Wishing to avoid conflict with her son, Benji and Narcy married in 1991 and started living together. Narcy left her job as a stripper to help Benji with his business and to write books together. After their wedding, they enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, affording expensive clothes, dining out, and luxury cars. Additionally, Benji was an avid collector of Batman memorabilia, owning the second largest collection in the world, which included a 1,977 Batmobile. Among other items, he was meticulous about his purchases, always negotiating to get the best prices. In total, his collection was valued at around $2 million. It is worth noting that in Amore business, Benji saved on everything. He organized conventions for large companies and made a point to cut costs wherever possible. This careful management allowed him to preserve his father's assets, which still contained a significant amount of money, around $10 million that he inherited. Benji frequently traveled for work, as he valued his freedom and did not like being tied down at home. Although he had no health issues, neither he nor Narcy wanted children. When Narcy's daughter grew up, she had 2 sons and began assisting her mother and stepfather with their business. May affectionately called Benji Dad and had a good relationship with him, receiving financial support from him as well. On July 10, 2009, Benji, Narcy, and May traveled from Florida to New York to organize a conference for the Amway Company, which would welcome thousands of participants from various cities. They stayed at the Hilton Hotel in Westchester County. Benji and Narcy in room 455, while May had her own room nearby. 2 days later, around 7 a.m., Narcy left their room to have breakfast in the cafe on the first floor. After a short time, about 40 minutes, she returned to their room. When she found her husband lying face down on the floor, there was a significant amount of blood around him. Benji was bound, and a gag was in his mouth, indicating he had been attacked. Panicked, Narcy called 911. Then she rushed down the corridor, crying out to another hotel guest that her husband had been killed. When the police and medical personnel arrived, they confirmed that Benji was dead. Initially, investigators believed he might have been the target of a robbery. After thoroughly inspecting the room, it was found that nearly all valuables were intact. Benji regularly carried large amounts of cash to conferences, and that money was untouched. The only item missing was a gold bracelet adorned with diamonds and engraved with his name. Investigative agency was revealed that a hotel employee called the Novak family's room at 6:54 a.m. At this time, Benji answered the phone and spoke with the employee about the upcoming conference. This shows he was still alive when Narcy left the room. Security camera footage showed Narcy moving around the hotel and supported her claim that she was having breakfast when her husband was attacked. Although Narcy was taken to the police station for questioning, she completely denied any wrongdoing and claimed she had no knowledge of what happened to Benji. She emphasized to investigators that Benji was a strict and tough person who often upset those around him. She explained that on the night in question, he had worked late into the night and went to bed only after sunrise. So she had breakfast on her own at 7:15 a.m. She went downstairs to the cafe, where she spoke with a hotel employee. The employee mentioned that they did not expect many attendees at the conference. As a result, many participants are forced to buy plastic plate because they fit the budget. After this conversation, Narcy tried to call Benji on his mobile phone to share this disappointing news. But he did not answer, thinking he was simply asleep. So Narcy did not feel concerned. Narcy went to the conference room to assess the situation. Afterward, she returned to her own room and sensed something was off, but Narcy chose to take a shower. Once she entered the bedroom, she discovered Benji dead and urgently called 911. The police and ambulance arrived at 7:57 a.m. Upon investigating, the police found no forced entry. The hotel room doors were secure. The keycard data revealed that Narcy had opened the door at midnight and again at 7:04 a.m. She could not remember exactly whether she closed the door behind her when she left in the morning or if she forgot to do it. Allowing someone to get inside without a key card during a lengthy 12-hour interrogation, Narcy acknowledged that she and Benji often engaged in bondage during sex and that he enjoyed it. This raised questions about why Benji was found in an unusual position. Narcy explained that on that morning, she had tied him up during their sexual activities and left, intending for him to wait and become more aroused. She also recounted an incident in which Benji had broken her nose and then sent her to a plastic surgeon to fix it when she woke up from the surgery. She discovered that silicone breast implants had also been inserted without her consent when asked if she had any role in her husband's death. Narcy firmly replied, "No," she added. "If you suspect me, then bring the electric chair. I'm ready to sit on it right now. I don't want to suffer. Let me do it right now." Investigators interviewing Narcy noted that her emotional responses appeared to lack sincerity. The following day, July 13, she failed a lie detector test but was released due to insufficient evidence shortly after. The autopsy results for Benji were revealed. It was confirmed that he had been attacked while sleeping. He sustained a blow to the head from a blunt object, was bound, and gagged. The attacker also his eyes, and Benji ultimately died from choking on his own blood. Next to Benji's body, police discovered a pair of cheap, fake glasses resembling a well-known brand. Narcy claimed the glasses were hers. They had broken, and she had given them to Benji for repair. Detectives found it odd that a wealthy woman would own such inexpensive fakes. Those close to Benji described Narcy as very jealous. On one occasion, Narcy caught her husband with another woman, leading her to erupt in jealousy and threatened to burn their house down. However, following Benji's death, she denied these claims, asserting that such incidents had never occurred. Detectives investigated Benji's banking transactions and discovered that he had been paying for an apartment in Florida for the past 2 years. Rebecca Bliss lived in this apartment. She had moved to America from Lebanon and previously worked in adult films. But after meeting Benji in 2007, she stopped doing dirty filming. Rebecca was Benji's mistress, and he covered all her expenses. He managed to keep this secret relationship hidden for a long time. However, just a few months before Benji's death, Narcy learned about the affair. She confronted Rebecca and offered make to her $10 to end the relationship with Benji and stay away from him. But Rebecca declined the offer. No one was certain if Benji intended to leave his wife, but it was clear that, if they divorced, Narcy would receive only $65 and relocation expenses according to their marriage contract. But now, Benji's multi-million-dollar fortune would ultimately be transferred to her. Investigative agency was revealed that 7 years earlier, in 2002, Benji had already been the victim of a home invasion. 2 unknown men broke into his home, tied him up, and held him hostage for an entire day without food or water. They stole valuables and cash totaling $400. Benji later told his friends that he believed Narcy orchestrated the attack instead of going to the police. He filed for divorce. Following this, Narcy began to spread harmful rumors about Benji's sexual preferences. In response, he retracted his divorce filing and continued to live with Narcy, insisting that he loved her deeply. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Bernice had sadly passed away just 3 months earlier, on April 4, 2009. At that time, She, 87-year-old, lived alone in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, as reported. After parking her car in the driveway, she got out and immediately tripped and fell, injuring her face and head. Once inside her home, she went to the bathroom to clean herself up, but fell several more times. She lay on the floor for 2 days without being able to call for help. Her body was found a week later. An autopsy revealed that Bernice had a broken jaw and teeth, along with skull injuries. Given her age and the circumstances, investigators concluded that her death was accidental. Relatives remembered Bernice as an active elderly woman who took care of herself. She called Benji every day and had a good relationship with May. Benji was deeply saddened by his mother's death and threw himself into work to distract himself from his grief. However, as time went on, he began to suspect that his mother's death was not an accident. After Benji's death, Narcy returned to her home in Florida, where May accused her of being responsible for her stepfather's death. This led to a major argument between Narcy and May, during which Narcy struck her daughter with a metal crowbar. Neighbors intervened to separate them and urged them to calm down. 10 days after, the police received an anonymous letter written in Spanish. The letter claimed that Narcy was involved in Benji's death and suggested investigating her brother, 57-year-old Cristobal Velas, who lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and worked as a bus driver. The police located Cristobal and questioned him, but he denied any involvement in Benji's death. Detectives gathered information about Cristobal and were immediately interested in the money transfers that he had made in the last month. Cristobal had sent money to a man named Alejandro Garcia, who had a criminal history and a noticeable physical characteristic. He had only one healthy eye. The other was damaged. He almost always wore glasses to hide the defect. The detectives started to suspect that Cristobal had paid Alejandro for the murder of Benji. The crime occurred at the Hilton Hotel, where there were numerous CCTV cameras. The detectives soon found video footage of Alejandro at the hotel, accompanied by another man named Joel Gonzalez. The police began to monitor the locations and bank transactions of both men and discovered that Alejandro and Joel had been living in South Florida for several months. After Benji's death, investigators were exploring the possibility that Narcy had Benji murdered because she feared he would leave her for his mistress, leaving her with nothing. After her husband's death, Narcy, still in New York, received $100 from his company as the main suspect in the case. She was not entitled to inherit his assets upon returning to Florida. Narcy began selling Benji's and Bernice's property. Keeping all the profits for herself, she sold many valuables, including part of a Batman toy collection. In August 2009, Narcy appeared at the bank with the keys to 3 safes in which Benji's valuables and papers were kept. She deceived the bank employees by saying that her husband would arrive in a few hours and give his consent, even though, at that time, 7 weeks had passed since Benji's death. Nobody knew what was inside. Before Narcy emptied the safes and left, Benji's body remained in the morgue for an extended period while the investigation continued. It was only 2 months after his death that he was finally buried in Queens County, New York, next to his father's grave. In November 2009, police summoned Alejandro and Joel for questioning. Initially, both men denied their involvement, but then they confessed. The investigators explained that Cristobal had found them and brought them to New York. At that time, Narcy was dining with Benji at the Hilton Hotel restaurant. While Alejandro and Joel sat at a nearby table, Narcy stroked Benji's hair and subtly signaled to the mercenaries who their target was. On the morning of July 12, while Benji was still asleep, Narcy invited Alejandro and Joel into their room. They assaulted the sleeping Benji with a baton, while Narcy directed their actions at her request. They even gouged out Benji's eyes. Cristobal then paid Alejandro thousands of dollars because carrying out the attack on the Novak family. Investigators found material evidence, including cheap glasses belonging to one of the mercenaries, which confirmed that Alejandro and Joel had been at the scene. In July 2010, a year after the crime, Narcy and Cristobal were arrested at the same time. The prosecutor's office reopened the investigation into the death of Bernice. This new investigation uncovered evidence that Bernice had also been murdered. A neighbor reported seeing two men in black clothing approaching Bernice's house and hiding behind the garage during a plea bargain. Alejandro confessed that he and Joel were responsible for attacking Bernice at Narcy's request. They used a gas wrench to beat Bernice, which led to her death. In April 2011, Narcy and Cristobal were charged with Bernice's murder as well. The primary motive for these contract killings was a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Narcy and Cristobal went on trial in 2012, where they both denied any involvement in the deaths of Benji and Bernice. During the trial, the investigation agency was revealed that Narcy had a secret phone at 6:39 a.m. on July 12, 2009. She used this phone to call Alejandro and Joel, inviting them to her room. They arrived at the correct floor and entered the room, which was not monitored by cameras after the murder took place. Narcy left the room casually, as if nothing had happened, and went to the first floor to establish an alibi. She had a meal at a cafe, conversed with a hotel employee, and then proceeded to a conference room. In court, when asked who, in her opinion, could have ordered the murder of Bernice and Benji, Narcy pointed her finger at her own daughter, May. Cristobal agreed with Narcy, stating that the idea belonged to May. The court also heard that after the arrest of Alejandro and Joel, a photograph of May was found in their pocket. May was to become the third victim. After the authorities discovered that May's life was in danger, she was asked to move to New York. It turned out that while still at large, Narcy hired a detective to collect dirt on May. The detective followed her and her sons, rummaged through their trash can, and collected personal belongings while living in New York. May quickly ran out of money. A local officer lent her $5,000 soon. May returned the money, but the officer lost his job because he was accused of paying May to give false testimony in court. Ultimately, Narcy and Cristobal were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, domestic violence, stalking, money laundering, and witness tampering. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Narcy is ineligible to claim her late husband's estate. Alejandro and Joel were also found guilty of contract killings of two people. They were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole 30 years later. Other participants in this high-profile case were also found. Dennis Ramirez, the son-in-law of Cristobal, pleaded guilty to the fact that on July 12, he drove Alejandro and Joel to the Hilton Hotel after the crime. Dennis admitted their involvement in the crime and received a less severe punishment. One of the key pieces of evidence that helped bring the case to a close was an anonymous letter in Spanish that was submitted to police 10 days after the murder, written by both Narcy's sister and Cristobal, who lived in Florida. She confirmed that it was at Narcy's request that Bernice was killed. Then Benji, and the next victim was supposed to be May, while Benji was still alive. He left his will inheritance to Narcy, and in her will, she persuaded to Benji include May there. After Narcy's conviction, May became the sole heir to her stepfather's multi-million-dollar fortune. But the story does not end there. Whenever it comes to a large inheritance, everything is decided quite a long time and is calculated in decades. The fortune of May was really large. 2 houses in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where Benji and Bernice lived, 9 expensive cars, and also the Batmobile, a white yacht, Lightning, and a bunk barge, large bank accounts, with life insurance payouts for Benji and Bernice. Over the years of litigation, there have been people claiming to be Benji's, and they have tried to claim the inheritance. Benji's first adopted son, Ronald, who hit rock bottom in the 2000s and even lived in the woods, suffered from mental disorders. His mother, Elsie, died in 2001, leaving her adopted son a fairly large inheritance. However, Ronald was nowhere to be found. They couldn't find him and reported him missing in 2008. just 2 days before he was declared dead. Ronald suddenly showed up and took over his adoptive mother Elsie's inheritance due to mental health issues. Ronald's money was put into a trust. Ronald was paid $400 a week and also had all his medical care paid for a year after Benji died. Ronald started fighting over his inheritance. He had enough money to hire a good lawyer and tried to sue for the property of Benji. Ronald tried to prove that May was included in Novak's will under pressure from Narcy. He attempted to deprive May of the right to inherit her stepfather, but he failed. For a decade, May Abad fought for her stepfather's money once. She needed a fairly large sum of money for her son's operation. The boy had heart problems. Then May received $50,000 from Novak's assets. Eventually, May, together with her sons, became the full heirs of the Novak family fortune. However, over the years of litigation, the total amount of the inheritance has significantly decreased. The case of Ben Novak Jr. not only exposes the greed and cold calculation of a wealthy family, but also highlights the human nature when caught up in the whirlwind of money and power. Through the involvement of Narchi, her brother Cristobal, the case proves that the most brutal acts sometimes come from those closest. The consequences include not only life sentences for the conspirators, but also the complete collapse of a family empire that was once seen as a symbol of success. The case leaves a profound reminder of the dangers of greed, betrayal, and bad choices, and becomes one of the most haunting crime stories in American history. Detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lucy Davis. Lucy Davis was born in 1971 in the picturesque town of Penimprid, Wales. Her childhood was filled with love and warmth, thanks to her parents, Roger and Andre, who created a happy and comfortable home. Lucy grew up in the beautiful village of Glenk with her younger sister, Anna. Lucy took her first steps surrounded by majestic mountains and enchanting forests. Her kind nature and charming smile make her stand out, becoming a dynamic and special individual among those around her. Lucy easily gained the sympathy of her teachers and classmates. She developed a passion for horseback riding at a young age and had an endless love for horses. Seeing how eager Lucy was, her father arranged for her and her younger sister to take horse riding lessons with experienced instructors. They mastered the basics of this noble art, conquering challenges and overcoming obstacles. Lucy and Anna became skilled horse riders. Lucy Davis had a wonderful childhood in Wales, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the love of family and community, which helped her grow and develop. Lucy and Anna developed a passion for horse riding, which not only brought them companions but also taught them valuable life skills such as discipline, self-control, and responsibility. Their talent and perseverance earned them recognition at prestigious competitions, where they won multiple awards. However, Lucy's interests extended beyond horse riding. With a curious mind and a desire for knowledge, Lucy explored other passions, including music. She took flute and piano lessons, diligently honing her skills, and within a year, she had mastered both instruments, captivating audiences with her performances. This led to her joining the Glamorgan Youth Orchestra, where she continued to refine her musical talents. Lucy also participates in the school choir, which allows her to express her creativity and love of music. Lucy Davis's childhood was a balance of fun and dedication, marked by hard work and eager to learn. These qualities formed a strong base that would support her future successes and help her become an extraordinary person. In high school, Lucy became close friends with Garrick Jenkinson, a quiet and enigmatic young man from Wales. Despite not knowing much about his background, but they developed a strong and lasting connection. Garrett and Lucy became closer friends as time passed. However, Garrett secretly harbored romantic feelings for Lucy. After graduating from high school in 1998, Lucy pursued her passion for music and enrolled at the University of Yorkshire in Northern England. She initially aspired to become a music teacher but later realized her true desire was to create art in a major city. This realization led Lucy to meet Grimmy McAllister, whose perspective and humor aligned with hers. As their connection grew, Lucy introduced Grimmy to her parents, Roger and Andre. The introduction was a success, and Lucy's parents saw Grimmy as an ideal partner for their daughter. After careful consideration, Lucy and Grimmy chose to live together and start a family. In 1995, while in college, the couple had a son named James and Ann. To care for their child, Lucy took a break from her studies, while Grimmy continued his education and worked night shifts at the postal sorting department to support their family. Despite the challenges she faced, Lucy was hopeful about their future, driven by her love for her family and her aspirations for a better life. However, spending months at home with the baby took a toll on her, and she began to feel lonely. The fact that she and Grimmy rarely spent time together, due to his night shifts, made the problem even worse. Seeking companionship and someone to talk to, Lucy created a social media account under the nickname Miseria. This virtual outlet allowed her to share her experiences and connect with others. One user in particular caught her attention, Harold Landry, a 53 years old, he from Louisiana who had grown up in poverty and was fixated on achieving independence and success. Harold put in a lot of work and eventually came to an important insight. He understood that real wealth came not from owning oil wells, but from providing the essential tools and machinery needed to keep them running. With this insight, he founded a company that specializes in manufacturing hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. As his business thrived, Harold's fortunes grew, earning him not only financial security but also prestige and, eventually, the status of a billionaire. For Lucy, conversing with Harold was invigorating. She was captivated by his life experiences, dedication, and generosity. However, their relationship was not without its challenges. The significant gaps in their age, social standing, and lifestyle often caused friction between them. When Harold and Lucy first met, Harold's life seemed to be a confusing combination of luxury in many different experiences. He indulged in unusual hobbies, acquired luxury items, and owned real estate on KML Island in Mexico. There is no information about his previous marriages. He was married and divorced twice, but it is not known whether he had children from these marriages. Harold's life underwent a major transformation in 1992. Following his second divorce, he met Geraldine, a woman 20 years his junior, born in 1966 and originally from Mexico. At the time, Geraldine was married to Chris Price and had 2 children. Despite Geraldine being married, but Harold successfully captured her heart. On February 6, 1994, Harold planned a romantic dinner for Geraldine in New Orleans. They employed Christian Hurton as a babysitter for their children, giving them the opportunity to enjoy a romantic evening by themselves, free from childcare responsibilities. After dinner, Harold walked Geraldine home and then offered to drive Christian home as a thank you. Unbeknownst to Harold, Chris Price, Geraldine's husband, had been monitoring the couple's secret affair. Chris, who was watching from his car, decided to confront Harold. He chased after him, finally catching up at a red light. Chris rushed towards Harold, shouting accusations. Harold remained calm, pulled out a gun, and warned Chris to back off. Enraged, Chris dared Harold to shoot. Without hesitation, Harold fired, hitting Chris in the neck. Fortunately, Chris received prompt medical treatment from a nearby hospital, and which saved his life. In 1997, Harold was tried in St. Mary Parish Court for the attempted murder of Chris Price. His lawyer, Pete Fannin, argued that Harold was a victim of a setup. The jury found Harold guilty of aggravated assault with a weapon, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, after appealing, Harold was released on parole, required to pay a fine and perform community service. Harold was thankful to Pete for his assistance and they formed a friendship. Harold and Chris reached a settlement, but the details of the compensation were kept private. Harold then lived in Covington as a wealthy man, openly discussing his past with Lucy, including his previous failed marriages and a traumatic incident. Lucy became more attracted to Harold after he shared his secrets. She was captivated by his persuasive nature. After Lucy ended her relationship with Grimmy, she and Harold chose to start dating. To shield them from unwanted issues, Harold aimed to steer clear of trouble. In early 2000, Harold visited England to meet Lucy's parents, Roger and Andre. Although they were initially surprised by the age gap, they supported their daughter's decision and didn't meddle in the relationship. Harold gave Lucy many costly presents because he wanted to fulfill all her wishes. His love was intense, and he contemplated marriage, but wanted everything to be flawless. Harold plans a trip to Mexico to strengthen his relationship, inviting Lucy, her son James, and her ex-husband Grimmy to join them on this special journey. Mexico was a paradise for Harold, and having his friend and lawyer Pete's apartment nearby added to the trip's comfort. Harold had recently bought a diamond engagement ring and shared the news with Pete. However, Pete suspected Lucy was cheating on Harold due to her frequent meetings with Grimmy. Despite Pete's warnings, Harold proposed to Lucy, blinded by his love for her. She accepted his proposal. In mid-2003, Harold and Lucy got married. Harold purchased a $1 million home in Warshire County, and they started a new life together. Their neighbors, Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, were friendly and helped them feel welcome in the area. After the wedding, Lucy gave birth to a daughter named Hearth. Harold also welcomed James, Lucy's son from her previous marriage, into their family and treated him as his own. Over time, Lucy and Harold's relationship began to deteriorate. Harold became increasingly controlling, expecting Lucy to obey him completely. However, Lucy was an independent person and refused to comply with Harold's demands. As a result, arguments and disagreements became more frequent, creating a tense atmosphere at home. Their son, James, had a difficult and unhappy childhood due to his family's stressful environment. Lucy and Harold's relationship was deteriorating, and their neighbors took notice. The situation was made worse by their growing reliance on alcohol, which added to their existing problems. However, when the arguing and shouting stopped, neighbors thought the couple was trying to resolve their issues. In 2009, Lucy reconnected with her old school friend Garrett on social media. Their online conversations became a source of comfort for Lucy during a difficult time in her life. As Harold sensed Lucy's growing distance, he realized she was seeking solace in another man. Not wanting to confront the situation, Harold left for Mexico, leaving Lucy alone. During his absence, Lucy invited Garrett to visit. Harold was surprised when he got home. Shortly after, Lucy filed for divorce. And Harold began an affair with their neighbor, Rachel. Harold and Lucy's divorce proceedings were complicated by disagreements over dividing their assets. Lucy wanted to keep the family home for the sake of their children, while Harold was adamant that they sell it and offered her a financial settlement instead. The situation between Lucy and Harold became increasingly heated, and Lucy revealed some of Harold's past secrets. When Lucy returns home, the arguments continue, and the tension between her and Harold causes Jameson and Hearth much suffering. On the evening of Monday, February 1, 2010, Harold was drinking wine when a package intended for his neighbor, Stephen Kennedy, was mistakenly delivered to his address. Later that evening, around 9 p.m., Stephen stopped by Harold's house to collect his package after noticing the delivery notification. Upon arriving, Stephen was greeted by Harold, then Harold offered him a glass of wine. Although Harold had already been drinking and was visibly intoxicated, Stephen accepted the offer. After a brief visit, during which he collected his package and exchanged greetings with Lucy, and Stephen left. Harold and Lucy's argument soon resumed, this time centering on Lucy's plans to buy furniture for her new home. James rushed into the kitchen after hearing a commotion and witnessed Harold physically abusing his mother with a kitchen utensil. James immediately called the police and comforted his younger sister. Meanwhile, Lucy grabbed the children and attempted to escape the house, heading to Stephen's residence in search of help. However, Harold caught up with her during the escape and violently attacked her with a knife, stabbing her in the chest. He then dragged her body under a nearby bush, attempting to conceal the crime. Upon hearing the screams, Stephen rushed outside and discovered Lucy's lifeless body. Initially, he thought she had fainted, but soon realized the gravity of the situation. Police officer Steve C. Fox arrived at the crime scene and immediately called for an ambulance. He then began searching the neighborhood for Harold, but unfortunately, he was unable to find Harold. The children, traumatized and frightened, hid in the house until the police arrived. A tragic incident drastically altered the family's life, leading to a prolonged and challenging struggle for justice. An ambulance quickly arrived and transported Lucy to Yorkshire Hospital, but unfortunately, she succumbed after to the hospital. At the same time, a fearful Harold knocked on his friend Rachel's door, his voice shaking. He confessed to doing something terrible, but didn't reveal what it was. Harold then gave Rachel a large sum of money, $40,000, along with all his cash, car keys, and paychecks. After that, he headed home. Meanwhile, the police were searching for Harold. They scoured the streets, interviewed witnesses, but he seemed to have vanished. However, luck eventually turned in the detectives' favor, and Harold was arrested on his way back from Rachel's house. His face, filled with fear and remorse, was telling. Lucy's family, including her parents Roger and Andre, were overcome with grief. In a statement to the press, they expressed their profound sorrow at the loss of their daughter and chose not to make any additional comments. The forensic examination confirmed that Lucy died from multiple stab wounds to the chest. The investigation relied heavily on evidence discovered at the crime scene and a key eyewitness account from James, Lucy's son, who saw the tragic event unfold. February 24, 2011, was a day of tension in the courtroom, as everyone waited anxiously for the verdict in the trial of 64-year-old Harold Landry, who was accused of murdering his 38-year-old wife, Lucy. The jury had just delivered their guilty verdict, and the air was thick with bitterness and loss. Harold should have been Lucy's rock and protector, stood accused of her murder. His lawyer and friend, Pete, had passed the case to experienced attorney Andy Child, who faced an uphill battle in defending Harold. The defense's task was to convince the court that Harold never intended to take Lucy's life. The defense claimed that Harold acted in response to Lucy's aggressive behavior. Overcome with emotion, Harold swore he loved his wife and was consumed by remorse, insisting he never meant to hurt her. As part of his defense strategy, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter in connection with Lucy's death. However, the prosecution presented damning evidence, including disturbing photographs of multiple wounds on Lucy's body. The brutality of Harold's attack left no doubt about his guilt. After a thorough review of the evidence, the court delivered its verdict. Harold Landry was found guilty of Lucy's death and sentenced to life in prison. He must serve 16 years before being eligible for parole, at which point he will be 82 years old. The story of Harold and Lucy is a tragic love story. Although the trial is over, the consequences of this tragedy still linger. Lucy's parents, Roger and Andre, felt that the verdict was fair, but it did not alleviate their grief. Meanwhile, Harold Landry maintained his innocence and vowed to appeal the decision. He claimed that he would not change anything, even with the benefit of hindsight. Harold has been held accountable for his actions. Welcome to our channel, Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shad Therian. Shad Therian was born on September 7, 1997, in Green Bay, Wisconsin, to parents Tara Pinich and Michael Therian. His parents later separated, and his mother started dating a man named Steve. Shad Therian grew up in a loving family that included his parents, two sisters, Ava and Svea, a brother, Bo Smith, and his younger sibling, Therian. He was also surrounded by a large, close-knit family that included paternal and maternal grandparents, as well as many aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and cousins. Additionally, Shad Therian had many friends who were like a second family to him. As a child, Shad attended Howard and SWO schools. However, he later decided to help out with the family business, working alongside his father and grandfather. Shad was a lively and adventurous person who enjoyed activities such as camping, gaming, and spending quality time with loved ones. Shad was a talented and artistic person who loved carving wood. He was also kind and compassionate, often putting others' interests before his own. His empathetic nature made him a loving family member. However, what happened to him is all the more tragic because of his good character. On the evening of February 23, 2022, Shad told his family that he was going out to meet two friends. They planned to hang out for the night, and his parents bid him goodbye around 9:30 p.m. At the time, no one knew the danger he was about to face. Shad's mother, Tara, had gone out for a while and returned a couple of hours later. She then went upstairs to sleep, unaware that her son had returned home with his friend Taylor and was in the basement. Several hours after midnight, Tara was awoken by the sound of the front door slamming shut as Taylor left. This startled her, and she came downstairs. Tara called out to her son, but when he didn't answer, she went down to the basement to look for him. As she entered the basement, she noticed a bucket with a rag covering it, and she removed the rag, revealing a horrific sight. Her son's severed head was inside the bucket. Panicked, she immediately called 911. "My son's head is in a bucket in my basement," she told the operator. When the operator asked her to confirm what she had seen, she replied, "I looked in a bucket and saw my son's head." When police officers arrived at her residence on Stony Brook Lane in Green Bay, Wisconsin, they secured the entire house before entering the basement. There, they were met with a gruesome scene that left them shocked. They knew they had to find the person responsible for the savage crime, as they posed a potential threat to society as a whole. During their investigation, detectives made a disturbing discovery in a bucket: Shad's severed genitalia and head. They then analyzed Shad's phone records and found that on the evening of February 23rd, he had agreed to meet his friends Taylor and Alexander. At around 9:30 p.m. Taylor picked up Shad to hang out at her apartment. According to Shad's mother, Tara, police questioned Taylor and Alexander at their homes. Taylor was living with her friend Scott Thomas at his house. At Taylor's residence, detectives found bloody footprints near her minivan leading up to her apartment. The investigators took Taylor to the station for additional questioning despite having already been charged with a horrific crime: beheading her ex-partner. A bizarre scene unfolded in the interrogation room as Taylor appeared unconcerned by the situation and instead focused on complaining about the room's cleanliness. As she sat, gazing at the camera, it became evident that she showed no signs of remorse or guilt over what she had done to Shad Therian. The detective got straight to the point and asked her how she knew Shad. Taylor replied that he was her ex-boyfriend. She also admitted that she had met with Shad on February 23rd in her apartment, where Scott was also present. Additionally, she confirmed that the minivan belonged to Scott. When questioned about the activities she, Shad, and Alexander did that night, Taylor readily confessed that they had smoked weed together. She explained that she was giving Shad a haircut while they smoked. However, after a while, Alexander decided to head home, citing the late hour. After Alexander left, Taylor and Shed decided to go to Shad's house, where he told her that his mother and her boyfriend would be coming home late. They went to Shad's house, where they used ice and also injected trazodone, a medication Taylor had stolen from her friend Scott. This revelation suggested that Taylor struggled with substance abuse, adding another layer of complexity to the case. During the interrogation, the detective realized that Taylor was under the influence of drugs, but continued questioning her anyway. Taylor told Detective Graff that Shad's body was still in the basement. When the detective asked for more details about what happened to Shad, Taylor claimed she couldn't remember, saying she had blacked out after smoking and drinking for a while. During the interrogation, Taylor initially attempted to deceive the detectives but soon realized her tactics were ineffective. She eventually confessed to being intimate with Shad on the night in question, revealing that their encounter involved various props, including a choke collar. As the questioning continued, Taylor acknowledged that she took pleasure in strangling Shad, and that he also enjoyed it. This behavior exposed her sadistic and violent tendencies. When asked about her preferences, Taylor clarified that she enjoyed being the one doing the strangling, rather than being on the receiving end. She also admitted to having a history of engaging in this behavior. When questioned about the whereabouts of the remaining body parts, Taylor expressed regret for not bringing Shad's head with her. However, this regret was not driven by remorse for her actions, but rather frustration with her own mistake, which ultimately led the police to her. The detective was surprised by her straightforward answers, which detailed the dismemberment of Shad's body. Taylor explained that some body parts were in the van, while others were in the basement. What was more astonishing was her lack of remorse after committing such a heinous crime. The conversation then shifted to the whereabouts of the body parts and organs. Taylor explained that they were all in a black bag. The detective wondered if they would need to take the head to a separate location, to which Taylor replied that it would be difficult to dispose of all the organs. The detective suspected Taylor's behavior was indicative of a disturbed psyche or mental health condition, hindering her emotional response to the crime. Alternatively, she might have been under the influence of drugs, triggering her to act on intrusive thoughts. During the interrogation, Taylor giggled and laughed while providing details of the crime, displaying a disturbing nonchalance. She casually admitted to dismembering her ex-lover with kitchen knives and not disposing of the body parts due to laziness. Her lack of emotion and calm demeanor raised doubts about her mental health and whether she had planned the harm. Taylor denied any intention, but her response lacked remorse. Taylor described how she strangled Shad with chains, admitting that she enjoyed the process and didn't stop even when Shad struggled. This behavior showcases her cruel and sadistic nature. During the interrogation, Taylor shocked the detectives by revealing that Taylor continued to engage in sex with Shad's body after discovering he had passed away. Taylor made a disturbing statement, claiming that when she loved something or someone too much, Taylor felt an overwhelming urge to kill it and lost control. This suggests that Taylor was fully aware of her actions when she dismembered Shad, as the incident occurred immediately after they had been intimate. Taylor openly discussed her disturbing actions after killing Shad, revealing a shocking disregard for human life. Taylor admitted to playing with his body for 2 to 3 hours after his death, demonstrating necrophiliac tendencies. Taylor also expressed regret over not taking any drugs after the incident, knowing it would have calmed her down. During the dismemberment and cleanup process, she became frustrated, but later claimed to have enjoyed it. Taylor explained that she was in a state of panic after the incident and didn't know how to react. She considered calling the police or an ambulance but didn't. When questioned by Detective David about her decision, Taylor expressed regret over her actions. She acknowledged that she had thought about seeking help but was overwhelmed by her emotions. In a later interrogation, Taylor provided a detailed and graphic account of how she dismembered the victim's body. Taylor pulled him over, his head hanging off the bed, near the tub. After I cut his head off, Taylor moved the tub underneath. Taylor explains the sequence. "I beheaded the body, blood spilled into a pail, and the head fell in. I poured the contents into a blue Tupperware, finished cutting the head, and placed it in a container. The internal organs are in the Tupperware were scattered around, some in separate plastic bags. I put the bagged organs in a backpack, leaving the blood in the blue tub." Taylor Shaw Business was born in Avon, Illinois in November 1997 to Maria and Arturo Coronado. When she was in 4th grade, her family relocated to Wisconsin. Later, she married Warren Shaw Business and had a son, Matto, with him. Despite this, she reconnected with an ex-boyfriend, Shad Therian, and engaged in a relationship with him. After the heinous crime was committed, the authorities recognized that Taylor had significant mental health issues that required attention. However, they also determined that at the time of the crime, she was fully aware of her actions, which included the admission of enjoying the process of dismembering Shad's body. Taylor also confessed to using sex toys on his deceased body and engaging in other forms of physical intimacy with him. Taylor Shaw Business was arrested on February 23, 2022, for the murder and dismemberment of her ex-partner, Shad Therian. Her trial began on July 24, 2022. Due to the severity of the crime, the court needed to determine whether Taylor was sane at the time of the crime and if she understood that her actions were wrong. During the trial, Taylor's grandmother testified about Taylor's difficult childhood. She explained that Taylor's mother had passed away at a young age and her father had remarried. Taylor had also experienced the loss of her brother, Arturo Coronado Jr., in a motorcycle accident in 2021. Additionally, Taylor's husband, Warren Shaw Business, was already incarcerated for distributing methamphetamine and was also serving as Taylor's defender in court. The grandmother further revealed that Taylor's young son had been taken into custody by Child Protective Services just 24 hours after his birth. However, Taylor's grandmother and her husband were fighting to regain custody of their grandson, Matto. The grandmother attributed Taylor's turbulent upbringing to her struggles with depression and bipolar disorder. She emphasized that Taylor needed psychological help, but also deserved a second chance at life. Arturo Coronado, Taylor's 51-year-old father, was brought to the courtroom from prison, where he was serving time for assaulting a child. What was unsettling was Taylor's reaction to his presence. She couldn't stop smiling and giggling throughout his testimony. Despite her unusual behavior, her father provided a candid account of her upbringing. He acknowledged that Taylor had struggled in high school, which led him to send her to live with her grandparents in Texas, where she eventually graduated. He also revealed that Taylor had been admitted to a psychiatric center before the birth of her child, Matto, due to hallucinations and suicidal thoughts. According to her, Arturo Coronado, Taylor's life took a turn for the worse when she met her husband, who introduced her to drugs. When Alexander Gainan, a mutual friend of Taylor and Shad, took the stand to testify, Taylor continued to giggle and laugh throughout his statement. Alexander explained that he had known Taylor and Shad since their time at Bellevue Middle School, confirming that they had dated at the time. He also shared his account of the night of the murder, stating that he had been drinking with Taylor and others at her apartment, but left around 1 or 2 a.m. when it got late. Alexander added that he had attempted to contact Shad the following day, but received no response. At her next court appearance, Taylor was seen wearing a spit mask, typically used to prevent individuals from spitting on law enforcement or court staff. Valerie, Taylor's second cousin, and several distant relatives testified on her behalf, stating that while Taylor currently required psychological treatment, she deserved a second chance at life in the future. Kelly Therian criticized Taylor, saying her actions were cowardly and that her mental health issues shouldn't be a reason for parole. Assistant District Attorney Caleb Saunders concluded that Taylor's actions were not a result of her substance abuse or mental health issues, but rather a deliberate choice. He emphasized that her lack of remorse warrants the harsher sentence for such a heinous crime. Defense attorney Christopher Frolick argued Taylor deserves a second chance despite committing a horrific crime. He called the murder an honest mistake, suggesting Taylor didn't intentionally commit the crime or take pleasure in it. Frolick claimed Taylor was intoxicated and not fully aware of her actions when speaking with detectives. When Taylor requested a possible extension of the trial, her outburst in court revealed that Taylor was not only struggling with substance abuse, but also had deeper issues that required immediate attention. The trial concluded on September 26, 2022, with Judge Thomas Walsh sentencing Taylor to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case shocked the world due to the inhumane nature of the crime, in which Taylor dismembered her former lover, Shad Tyrion. What was even more disturbing was Taylor's apparent lack of remorse or guilt for the heinous crime she had committed. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Samadi Fonseca Fernandez. Samadi Fonseca Fernandez was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Not much is known about her early family life. Samadi grew up in Cuba, where she lived with her mother, Sonia Fonseca. She attended a local school. Samadi often used force or deception to get what she wanted. Samadi's striking looks and perfect figure make her a magnet, especially to men. Samadi's beauty and charm are overshadowed by her greed, vanity, and self-interest, which ultimately drives men away. Furthermore, she is extremely jealous and aggressive. Samadi, due to her youthful resemblance to Barbie, spent several years working at a Universal Company bookstore, dressing up as the iconic doll. After graduating from high school, Samadi started a long-term relationship with Osvaldo Fernando Ballery, a local television journalist 16 years her senior. Their relationship resulted in the birth of children, Christopher in 1996 and Christina a year later. However, constant arguments and jealousy eventually led Samadi to end the relationship in 2012. Shortly after, Osvaldo, 53, died suddenly. Osvaldo did not include Samadi in his will. Samadi took drastic action and seized Osvaldo's house, changing the locks to prevent relatives and heirs from entering. Samadi also took away Osvaldo's valuables. Osvaldo's family was furious and took Samadi to court for theft. Police intervened and forced Samadi to leave the house, but no criminal charges were filed against her. Samadi had other relationships, most notably with Miguel Angel Perez, the father of Samadi's third daughter, Maria. Although some reports claimed the couple were officially married, the relationship ended in divorce after a few years. It was strange that some of Samadi's lovers disappeared or died mysteriously under mysterious circumstances. But for a long time, for some reason, no one paid any attention to it. Another former lover, Diaco, met a tragic end after breaking up with Samadi. He was murdered during a robbery. The killers were never caught or brought to justice. As with the previous case, there was much speculation surrounding Samadi's possible involvement, but there was no solid evidence linking her to the crime. Samadi's most famous victim was Gerardo Cruz. Gerardo Cruz, a native of Costa Rica, was born in December 1992 in the city of San Jose. Gerardo Cruz lived with his mother, Ana Patricia, who soon married a man named Hermes Rodriguez, who raised Gerardo Cruz as his own son. Gerardo Cruz attended a regular school, developed a passion for motorcycles, and met his future partner, Carol, at a young age. By the time he was 23, Gerardo had settled down with Carol and their 4-year-old daughter, Genesis, in the suburban home of his aunt and uncle in San Sebastian. To support his family, Gerardo Cruz took a job at a local bakery. It was around this time, in the summer of 2015, that Gerardo Cruz met Samadi, a 40-year-old woman who frequented the bakery. Despite her age, Samadi was attractive. Samadi began having affairs with men much younger than herself, because the attention of young lovers probably delighted Samadi. Gerardo Cruz was one such affair. Despite the significant age difference, Gerardo Cruz quickly fell in love with Samadi and began to meet secretly. Samadi came to the bakery every day to see Gerardo Cruz, and other employees took notice of Samadi's frequent visits. Samadi would bring his 19-year-old daughter, Cristina, with him to the bakery. Initially, Gerardo Cruz was able to balance his family life and secretly date Samad without either woman finding out. He eventually let his guard down. He began bragging about his success with women and began sharing stories with friends and colleagues about Samadi, describing her as a great mistress who showered him with gifts. After just a few months together, in October 2015, Samadi discovered the truth about Gerardo Cruz having a pregnant wife and a child. Samadi was so angry that she started calling and texting Carol, Gerardo Cruz's wife, insulting her and threatening to kill Gerardo Cruz if he didn't belong to her. Gerardo Cruz tried to beg Carol's forgiveness. As for Samadi, he did not take her threat seriously, believing that she would quickly calm down and find a new boyfriend. Just days after breaking up with Samadi, Gerardo Cruz saw a man secretly filming a young girl's underwear with his phone. Gerardo Cruz filmed the man, stopped the girl, and advised her to report the incident to the police. He then chased the man, trying to capture his face on camera, until the man escaped in a taxi. Gerardo Cruz posted the video online and it quickly went viral. The man was identified as Luis Somano Delgado, a former member of the Ministry of Finance. The media picked up the story, and Gerardo Cruz became a national celebrity, outing Luis Somano Delgado in interviews. However, Luis Somano Delgado's lawyer accused Gerardo Cruz of wrongdoing, claiming that the video's distribution was illegal and preparing to file a lawsuit. Gerardo Cruz was surprised, wondering why he was being prosecuted instead of the man who committed the crime. Gerardo Cruz gave a radio interview confidently, without fear. The next day, he canceled his meeting with Oswald, citing an emergency after receiving a text message from Samadi, supposedly to discuss another interview with a young woman in a park. Unsuspecting, Gerardo Cruz met with her, but instead of journalists, two men stole his bag, beat him, and stabbed him multiple times. Gerardo Cruz called Oswald when he was unconscious, and Oswald called the police and paramedics. Gerardo Cruz was taken to the hospital, where doctors fought to save his life for 42 days. Gerardo Cruz underwent numerous operations, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful in saving his life. He passed away in the intensive care unit on November 19. Gerardo Cruz's funeral was attended by a large number of people who wanted to express their condolences to his family. The community came together to express their hope that the police would quickly apprehend the perpetrators and bring them to justice. Initially, the investigation explored multiple theories. The first was that Cruz was a victim of a robbery gone wrong. This seemed plausible, given that he was attacked in a park, his bag was stolen, and he was stabbed with a knife. The first theory is that Gerardo Cruz was the victim of a botched robbery, as he was attacked in a park, his bag stolen, and stabbed. However, Gerardo Cruz recently released a video exposing a nationally known former official, which has fueled another theory, that the attack was a revenge killing. The media speculated that the former official, Somano Delgado, may have hired a hitman to silence Gerardo Cruz, who had tarnished his reputation. The murder has sparked widespread debate in the press. Police later identified and tracked down the two men. The footage was made public and shown repeatedly on news programs, with viewers encouraged to watch the footage closely. Soon after, the identity of one suspect was confirmed when he voluntarily surrendered to the police, cooperating with the investigation in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. The investigation quickly identified several accomplices and organizers of the crime, Samadi and her daughter Cristina, thanks to information provided. Those involved, including taxi driver Ronald Archie, worker Cesar Chavez, a young miner, and Omar Costa, were arrested. The investigation revealed the roles and connections of all those involved in the crime through phone calls and text messages. Samadi was identified as the mastermind who had carefully planned the murder for his daughter Christina. They enlisted the help of friends Ronald Archie and Cesar Chavez to find two assassins to kill Gerardo Cruz and stage a robbery in the park at night. Omar Costa later joined the plot, tasked with ensuring Gerardo Cruz was present at the park. Samadi chose October 7th as the date of the massacre. Samadi kept in constant contact with all the suspects, assigning roles and ensuring everyone followed the plan. Furthermore, Samadi asked the participants to take an item from Gerardo Cruz as proof that the crime had been completed. The evidence against Samadi was a series of text messages outlining the murder plan and the roles of each participant in detail. The motive behind the crime was a case of jealousy. She had carefully planned the crime and even involved her own daughter, who assisted her in every step of the process. Both Samadi and her daughter were taken into custody immediately, and the possibility of releasing them on bail was ruled out due to concerns that they would attempt to flee the country. Their accomplices were also detained, except for Omar Costa, who was responsible for surveillance and was the youngest participant in the crime. As a minor, Omar Costa was handed over to authorities that specialize in handling juvenile offenders. The investigation took about a year and a half to complete, and the trial did not begin until December 2017. It was discovered that Samadi had a history of criminal activity. The verdict was not announced until January 23, 2018. According to the court decision, Samadi was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Her daughter, as well as Ronald Archie and Cesar Chavez, received 25 years in prison each. Omar Costa, on the other hand, who had been following the victim, was acquitted. Gerardo Cruz's family has received $140,000 in moral damages. After the verdict was announced, relatives expressed gratitude to the court for giving Gerardo Cruz's killers a fair punishment. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Dawn Hatcheny. Dawn Marie Hatcheny was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington. She is the eldest child and only daughter of Donald Hatcheny and Diana Parle. Her father worked in a shipyard, while her mother was a homemaker. Dawn grew up with her three brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek, in Bremerton, Washington. Dawn developed a strong faith from an early age. According to her mother, she accepted God into her life at the age of 4. However, her childhood was also challenging. Her parents struggled with anxiety and depression, which often led to frequent conflicts at home. When Dawn was about 11 years old, her mother, Diana, left the family for another man. This new relationship resulted in the birth of another child. However, the relationship did not last, and Diana eventually returned to the family, bringing her newborn child with her. Despite these hardships, Dawn did well in school. She worked hard to achieve good grades and overcome her challenges. Her hard work paid off when she entered the prestigious Scripps National Spelling Bee at age 12. This achievement not only led her to the White House, but also gave her the opportunity to meet former President Ronald Reagan. Dawn graduated as valedictorian from Bremerton Christian School in 1988 and then attended Northwest College of the Assemblies of God Church in Seattle. During her college years, she met Nick Hatcheny, and they quickly formed a close relationship. However, Dawn's friends were concerned when she called Nick her other half after only a few dates, as they worried that Nick's assertive personality might not be a good fit for her. They wanted Dawn to find someone who would be unwaveringly supportive and emotionally committed. Nick grew up in Poulsbo, Washington, and his childhood shared some similarities with Dawn's. However, his family life was difficult. His father, Dan, was often distant and busy with work, leaving Nick feeling neglected. Nick's mother, Sandra, was busy with home daycare and foster care. which left Nick feeling like he was not a priority to her. He even felt that his mother favored his biological siblings and adopted children over him, leading Nick to believe that she hated him. Nick struggled with the emotional distance between his parents, especially his mother's long-term depression and his father's lack of attention. As a result, Nick lacked emotional support and connection from his family, which had a profound impact on his life. Despite his isolation, Nick found comfort and faith in the Bible and Christianity, which boosted his confidence during his teenage years but occasionally led to social isolation due to his growing self-assurance. Nick and Dawn first met in college. Initially, Dawn's friends found it strange that she liked Nick because his personality was completely different from hers. She was outgoing and confident, while Nick was not. However, as Dawn spent more time with Nick, she began to change. She was no longer the confident, independent, and driven person she once was. Instead, she became shy and indecisive, often agreeing with Nick's decisions even when they were not right for her. Although their relationship seemed unhealthy, their love for each other remained strong. Nick proposed to Dawn on Alki Beach in 1990, and they were married on April 20, 1991. As newlyweds, they moved to Bremerton, where Dawn worked as a loan officer and Nick became a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island near Seattle. Nick had always aspired to be a youth pastor at Christ Community Church, where he had previously had a good relationship with a pastor named Smith. However, Nick gradually drifted away from Smith when he found doctrinal agreement with Pastor Robert Billy Craig. Robert saw in Nick as nothing more than a tool to carry out his plan to overthrow Smith and take complete control of the church as senior pastor. Meanwhile, in 1997, Dawn and Nick faced housing problems due to frequent moves, living in houses they had renovated and sold. Dawn dreamed of having a family and a stable life. To solve this problem, Nick found a house in need of repair in East Bremerton and planned to move in, renovate it, and make it their home. However, the purchase and repair of the house put Nick and Dawn in debt. Although their relationship appeared perfect, with Dawn being Nick's supportive and accommodating wife, there were hidden problems that no one saw. Dawn even joked that if she and Nick broke up, Nick would stay with her instead of moving back to his parents' house. Meanwhile, Nick continued to borrow money from church members, putting him further into debt. He embarked on an ambitious project to start a Christian youth camp. Although the project was financially taxing, Nick committed to it because he had a strong desire to do so. Nick's story was closely related to Sandy Glass, a parishioner of Christ Community Church. When Nick was trying to find the right land to build his youth camp, Sandy confirmed once again that he had great ambitions. Sandy Glass's life had been full of ups and downs. She had faced many hardships in her life. Her first boyfriend died of an unknown illness, her father died in a construction accident, and her brother struggled with drug addiction. She married Jimmy, a carpenter, but their financial situation was strained because the family depended entirely on Jimmy's income while Sandy stayed home to care for the children. Sandy also struggled with her spending habits, often living beyond her means. This led to frequent arguments between her and Jimmy. These arguments sometimes caused Jimmy to express his frustration by yelling or withdrawing from the situation. To resolve their marital conflicts, Sandy and Jimmy sought help from the church and attended marriage counseling sessions coordinated by Nick. Nick had been the church's marriage counselor for many years. However, some parishioners filed complaints with Pastor Robert about Nick's counseling style. They were upset that Nick often asked personal questions and ignored other important issues. His discussions often focused on sexual issues, ignoring other aspects of marriage. Despite this, church members trusted Nick because he had the support of their former pastor, Smith. They felt that Nick would not have been entrusted with this role if he were not trustworthy. In the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert replaced Smith as senior pastor. Smith and his wife then left to do missionary work in Africa. Jimmy's parents, who were also church members, disagreed with his decision to seek church counseling. They were skeptical about Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. When Nick focused primarily on Sandy, they became even more concerned because they felt he should focus on both of them equally. The relationship between Nick and Sandy went beyond the boundaries of a normal mentoring relationship. They spent too much time talking on the phone, meeting at church, and even outside. This made Jimmy's parents feel that their relationship was inappropriate as they interacted frequently and acted intimately. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, also noticed Nick's behavior and spoke to him privately. She expressed her concerns about his inappropriate behavior and advised him to focus on his own marriage. When complaints about Sandy and Nick's relationship arose, Robert had to intervene. He warned Sandy that her relationship with Nick was unacceptable and needed to end immediately. However, Sandy felt that she had a special connection with Nick. She wrote a letter to Robert, expressing her anger and frustration. In the letter, she stated that she felt Robert did not trust her. The relationship between Sandy and Nick had a negative impact on those around them. Dawn and Jimmy, along with Jimmy and Sandy's children, felt hurt by this. At one point, one of their children told Jimmy that Sandy and Nick had talked about Nick becoming their new father when Jimmy died. At church, Dawn began to share her grief with her friends. She told them about her financial situation and her desire to have children, but Nick was against the idea. By the end of 1997, Nick was romantically involved with several women besides Sandy. He spent time with them in private and on phone calls that lasted for hours. However, Sandy dreamed of the beautiful future she hoped to have with Nick. She encouraged him to invest more in the plan to open a youth camp and develop a romantic relationship with her. She believed that both of them were brought together by fate. A group of women in the congregation had tried to clear things up with Dawn, letting her know that the problems in her marriage with Nick had not been her fault, but rather Nick himself. However, her life had not turned out the way she had expected when she had married him. Back on Christmas, Dawn had woken up feeling unwell. Still, she and Nick had decided to visit her family and spend the day together. Later that evening, they had gone to Smith's house and spent time with his family. Early the next morning, the 26th, Nick had planned to go hunting with Lindsay Smith's daughter and her friends. Before leaving, Nick had met his friends at the Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County. After a few hours in the woods without catching anything, they had decided to return and have breakfast at a local diner around 9 a.m. While everyone was eating, Nick had suddenly become concerned and said that Dawn and he had not opened their Christmas presents. Around 9:30 a.m., Nick had left the diner and returned home. At 10 a.m., he had discovered that his wife had died in a fire. Investigators had discovered that the fire had initially started in Nick and Dawn's bedroom due to a faulty space heater. The space heater had burned fiercely and quickly spread due to the presence of newspapers and wrapping paper in the room. The situation had been made worse by the presence of multiple propane tanks on the floor. There had been a surprising detail in the story. Less than an hour earlier, Nick had told his friends at the diner that he and Dawn had not opened their Christmas presents. However, when he had spoken to the authorities, he had said that they had opened the presents the night before. Nick had explained that his wife, Dawn, had been feeling unwell and had gone to bed. He also had said he had received a propane tank as a Christmas gift. Because they had frequently renovated their home, they had to use a space heater during the winter. This type of heater often lacks modern safety features, leading to fires and deaths. The police had found no evidence that Nick's story had been false. As a local pastor, Nick had been well respected in the community and there had been no reason to suspect him of any involvement in his wife's death. Nick's congregation had tried to support him during what they had believed was a difficult time. Pastor Robert had suggested a way to try to ease Dawn's grief through prayer. However, Nick had rejected the idea, saying he had wanted Dawn to not experience any more pain. This rejection had surprised Pastor Robert, as Nick had previously been actively involved in church activities, including exorcisms. Mary Glass, Sandra's mother-in-law, had soon become suspicious of Nick's role in Dawn's death. She had thought that Dawn's death had not been an accident. She had urged her husband to contact the police to investigate, but this had not happened. Shortly thereafter, the police had determined that Dawn's death had been an accident and the case had been turned over to Nick's insurance company. Nick had received a large sum of money from his life insurance policy. This had been a bit strange to his friends and family, but they had later understood that Nick and Dawn's large debts and Nick's desire to build a youth camp had made him need the money. Some church members had found Nick's way of grieving for Dawn unusual, but they had not voiced their concerns because they had thought that people process grief differently. The church community then had held a celebration of Dawn's life, where family and friends had gathered to share stories about her and remember her life. During the celebration, Nick had shown remarkable composure throughout the funeral. Additionally, friends who had been helping clean Nick's house had discovered pictures of Dawn hidden in the back of a closet. This had suggested that Nick had wanted to remove memories of Dawn. Nick also had begun to show a cold and indifferent attitude towards many people, including some church members, neighbors, and friends. Nick's behavior had become even more suspicious when he had quickly developed a close relationship with Dawn's mother, Diana, under the guise of mourning his widowhood. This had shocked and outraged many. Even Pastor Robert could not stand Nick's behavior and had asked him to leave Christ Community Church. This expulsion had been a huge blow to Nick and marked the beginning of troubles in his life. On April 10, 2001, Sandy and her attorney met with the district attorney to negotiate her plea. In exchange for immunity, she had to reveal a secret that had been kept since the morning of December 26. Sandy recounted that on the morning of Dawn's death, Nick contacted her and said, "I did it." However, the conversation was interrupted by another call from the church informing her of Dawn's death. After the call ended, Sandy turned to Nick to clarify what he meant, but Nick simply said, "It's over, it's over." After several weeks, Sandy confronted Nick. At this point, he confessed to his crime. He had overdosed Dawn with Benadryl and then covered her face with a plastic bag to suffocate her. Dawn was still semi-conscious and had to watch as Nick murdered her. After making sure Dawn was dead, Nick arranged the crime scene to make it look like an accidental fire. He placed old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, underneath Dawn's body, and placed propane tanks near the bed. He also arranged the fireplace to cause a fire in order to erase any evidence of his crime. Dawn's autopsy revealed no soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs or blood. However, this result did not accurately reflect reality because Dawn's red blood cells showed signs of carbon monoxide. The person in charge of Dawn's autopsy concluded that her death was an accidental fire, ignoring important evidence. One reason for this conclusion was that since Dawn was the wife of a pastor, it was thought that Dawn could not have been involved in any adulterous behavior. Although carbon monoxide bound to red blood cells, an autopsy revealed that Dawn did not inhale smoke. However, she had overdosed on the drug Benadryl, 5 times the normal dose. Some believe that this dose was not enough to cause respiratory failure. The pathologist also suggested that even if she had been asleep, Dawn would have reacted to the increased temperatures of the fire. Interestingly, crime scene photos showed newspapers underneath Dawn's body, but this detail was largely overlooked. Nick was finally arrested on September 12, 2001, in the Kinko's parking lot and vehemently denied any involvement in Dawn's death. Nick still faced a first-degree murder charge. His bail was set at $750,000. Sandy's testimony to investigators added to the frustration with the police over the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick a suspect or making an arrest. Sandy cooperated with investigators because she was angry that Nick had relationships with other women in the church and felt taken advantage of. She believed that God did not approve of their relationship and that therefore Dawn's murder was against God's will. Church members who were questioned described Nick's strange behavior and inappropriate relationships. They also expressed frustration that he did not buy Dawn a tombstone after receiving the life insurance money. On September 17, 2001, Nick appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He alleged that the church had cursed him and that Pastor Robert was a much more evil influence than the police could understand. Nick's trial then began. Nick was initially charged with first-degree murder, but the charges were amended to aggravated first-degree murder, which carried a sentence of life in prison without parole. Witnesses who testified included women who had relationships with Nick and several church members who had confided in him. They provided information that helped the jury better understand Nick. They had shared details of experiences they believed involved visions and direct messages from God, but in reality, Nick had used these to rationalize and manipulate others. Smith's daughter testified, describing how she had been introduced to Nick through her father and how Nick had taken advantage of her during her teenage years. The sexual relationship between her and Nick had begun shortly after Dawn had died and continued until she had moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts had also testified, noting that Dawn's body had contained important clues regarding the events of that day. However, these clues had been ignored because Nick had been a pastor. Although there had been no signs of soot or carbon monoxide, which would have been unusual for a living, breathing person in a fire, the defense had vigorously contested these allegations. They had focused their efforts on portraying Nick's ex-partner, Sandy, as a jealous and vengeful man who had fabricated the accusations when he had discovered Nick's affairs with various women. On December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic death, the jury had deliberated for a day before finding Nick guilty of aggravated first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing on February 7, 2003, Nick had addressed Dawn's friends and family, asserting his innocence but expressing remorse for his actions and sharing his sorrow for their loss. Nick had acknowledged that Dawn had deserved better treatment and had been sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court had resulted in a modification of his sentence. The appeal had argued that the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder did not match Dawn's actual cause of death, as she had died from strangulation. The defense had argued that Nick did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court had ruled in favor of the appeal and commuted Nick's sentence to 26 years. Nick would be eligible for parole in 2025 and might be eligible for early release. Dawn had gone too soon, but not forgotten. She had chosen a life with someone she had trusted, but that had not come true. Sadly, that had led to betrayal and her heartbreaking death. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Heather Maples. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992, in Ocala, Florida. Her mother, Jennifer Hunter, had called Heather the storm baby because she had always been full of energy and courage, which had made many people jealous. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather had been very happy to welcome her younger brother Ryan into her life. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with developmental delays. Heather spent all her free time taking care of Ryan, helping him learn to talk, walk, and eat. In the following years, Heather showed her love and devotion to her younger brother. Until her graduation, she devoted all her time to Ryan. At the age of 22, Heather Maples decided to leave her hometown of Texas and start a new chapter in Tennessee, where she pursued her dream of becoming a psychologist. Heather's journey began when she received a call from her old classmate, Chaz. He had invited her to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he was studying. Chaz believed that this had been the perfect place for Heather, where she could get a good opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted the invitation and went to Murfreesboro in January 2015. There, she started a new life and her relationship with Chaz grew stronger and they became lovers. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found an office job in the area where they lived. She had to balance her work in college preparation, but everything seemed to be going well. However, Heather's relationship with Chaz did not last long. Soon, they decided to break up. Chaz moved away, leaving Heather alone in Murfreesboro. In early August, Heather had been excited to call her mother to share the great news. Heather had been accepted to college, and her mother had been so proud. On a normal morning at her real estate brokerage firm in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7, 2015, Kelsey Price had arrived at work and begun her daily routine. However, she had noticed that her friend and co-worker, Heather, had been running late as usual. Kelsey had decided to call Heather to wake her up but had received no response. Remembering Heather's plans for the night before, Kelsey hadn't been worried because Heather had asked her to pick her up if she overslept or didn't answer the phone. So, Kelsey had decided to go to Heather's apartment to wake her up. Heather's apartment had been in the same complex where they had worked. When she arrived, Kelsey had found the front door unlocked and had gone inside. She had found Heather lying on her bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. At first, Kelsey had thought Heather had had a wild night, but when she had tried to wake her up and had gotten no response, she had begun to worry. Kelsey had tapped Heather's leg, but there had still been no response. When she had touched Heather's leg, Kelsey had noticed that her leg had been very cold and had felt terrified. Kelsey Price had left the apartment and immediately called 911. Emergency services had quickly arrived on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey had been one of the first to arrive at the crime scene. He and the forensic team had conducted a thorough search of the apartment. There, they had discovered that Heather had been brutally beaten, showing signs of torture and sexual assault. Heather's hair had been covered in blood and splattered against the walls. Detective Massey and his partner, Detective Maples, had recalled the case as a terrifying nightmare. Witnessing this heartbreaking scene had been difficult, especially since they had shared the same last name as the victim, Heather Maples. Detectives had quickly realized that the case could be related to Heather's personal life. At that time, most of her friends had been suspected because they had all been close to Heather. In particular, her apartment had shown no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the attacker might have been invited in by Heather. While examining the scene, detectives had discovered several important pieces of evidence. Among them, an unidentified DNA sample and a hair that hadn't belonged to Heather had both been sent for analysis. In addition, a bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed had been a very important clue. According to Detective Massey, if someone had intentionally created a fingerprint, the trace wouldn't have been so clear. This fingerprint had also been sent for analysis in order to find the perpetrator. Heather's cell phone had been found in her apartment, but without a password, the police couldn't access the phone. At this time, Kelsey had played an important role in helping the police with the phone and also in notifying Heather's mother of her death. Detective Massey had hoped to get more information about Heather from her friend Kelsey Price. Kelsey had said that the relationship between Heather and Chaz had been quite tense because Chaz had had anger management problems and had been sometimes too aggressive with Heather. Therefore, Heather had decided to end this relationship. Having received important information, the police had decided to investigate Chaz immediately. However, an unexpected development had occurred when a young man named Michael had appeared at the crime scene. He had had the key to Heather's apartment and said he had met Heather at a bar. Michael had said that he hadn't had sex with Heather. Michael had testimony that the evening before Heather had died, she had called him and invited him to dinner. After dinner, Michael had gone home, and Heather had gone to a local bar with friends. Heather had called Michael at 11:40 to ask for help because she had been having trouble at a bar. A man named Ottavio had been bothering her and making her uncomfortable. Michael had agreed to go to the bar to help and then had driven Heather home. When they had arrived at the house, Heather had called Michael and asked him to buy some things, including biscuits, gravy, eggs, and sausage. After buying those things, Michael had driven Heather home and seen her go up the stairs. That had been the last time he had seen Heather, at approximately 2:30 a.m. on August 7th. During questioning, Michael had explained that he had had Heather's key and often unlocked the front door for her. He had also said that Heather's front door had often been left unlocked because she hadn't had a pocket for her keys. Investigators had taken Michael's fingerprints and DNA, but the results of the analysis had shown that they hadn't matched the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene. After Michael had been cleared as a suspect, investigators had turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Ottavio. Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's cell phone had raised the police's suspicions of Ottavio. Detectives had discovered that Heather had texted Ottavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. When asked about Ottavio, a friend of Heather's had said, "I didn't know much about him. He seemed like a really nice guy. He was funny." When asked why Heather had sent this friend a photo of herself and Ottavio, the friend had been unclear. However, when questioned further, the friend had explained that Ottavio had been more aggressive than usual at the bar, and Heather had been taken by surprise. She had not been prepared for this. Detectives had decided to speak to Ottavio to get his side of the story. Ottavio had said he had been hanging out with Heather. Ottavio and Heather had had some tequila and then had gone to the gym for a while. When asked about the photo of Ottavio and Heather, Ottavio had said it had been taken before they left for the gym. The photo had been taken by Heather and posted on Snapchat. The detectives had immediately realized that Ottavio had known nothing about Heather's death. But what if he had been involved in the case? Meanwhile, the interrogation had continued. The police had said that Heather had texted him and asked him to come to her house. However, Ottavio had denied it. When asked about Heather's late-night text, Ottavio had said that she had texted him around 2:30 but that he had fallen asleep and only saw the text the next morning. The detectives had escalated their questioning of Ottavio with a harsh interrogation method. They had told him that people had seen him at Heather's apartment, that there had been surveillance footage of him, and that there had been pictures of him with Heather. They had said that Ottavio had gone to Heather's apartment after she had texted him to come back, and then something had happened. They had also told him that there had been strange DNA all over Heather and that it would be compared to his DNA. Ottavio had been shocked by what he had heard. He had seemed genuinely clueless about what had happened to Heather. After questioning, he had agreed to a DNA test, believing that it would clear his name. The results had proved him right, as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, so the police had eliminated Ottavio as a suspect. Detectives had continued to investigate, reviewing surveillance footage and carefully examining every detail provided by witnesses, but it still had no leads on the case. On the 9th day of the investigation, Detective Massey had been about to leave the office late at night when he had received an important call from a forensic lab director. The call had brought the answer Massey had been waiting for regarding the bloody fingerprints found on Heather's bed. The prints had been matched to a young man named Brandon Bowling, who had a fingerprint record from a previous job at a company. While questioning Brandon, Detective Massey had asked Brandon how he had known Heather. Brandon had replied that they had met at the gym. Massey had continued by asking Brandon when exactly he had met Heather. It had been clear that Detective Massey had been taking a light-hearted approach to the interview, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what had happened that night. After hours of questioning Brandon, He admitted that he had last been to Heather's apartment in July and had never seen her again. However, the police produced evidence of his fingerprints on Heather's bed, which matched his own. Since the fingerprints collected from Heather's house were fresh, the detectives believed that Brandon was lying. Apparently, Brandon had some secrets and was hiding them, which raised suspicions about him. Brandon seemed to realize that all the evidence was against him and that he could be arrested, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, the investigators asked Brandon to provide a DNA sample, claiming that if he was innocent, the test results would prove it. Brandon agreed and hoped to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. Investigators asked the court for permission to access Brandon's phone to track his movements, calls, and texts on the night of the murder. When the court granted permission, they discovered a video on Brandon's phone that shocked even the most experienced detectives. In the video, Heather's room was recorded, capturing everything from intimate behavior to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. As a result, Brandon Richmond Bowling was arrested. In February 2018, Brandon pleaded guilty to assaulting Heather Maples. Consequently, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. During the trial, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a strong impression with her emotional speech. She announced that she forgave Brandon Bowling for the crimes he had committed against her family. After the trial ended, Jennifer met Brandon Bowling's mother in the hallway. There, she expressed her sympathy and shared the woman's pain with a warm hug. She said that they both lost a loved one that day. Unfortunately, however, Brandon Bowling never revealed the real reason behind his actions, leaving many questions and thoughts about his motives. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elle Edwards. Elle Edwards, a 26-year-old woman, she was a vibrant and beautiful young woman who worked as a cosmetologist at a local beauty salon and assisted a dermatologist. Her positive attitude and kindness have helped her win the hearts and satisfaction of all her customers, even the most difficult ones. Edwards is a highly skilled beauty professional, known for being cheerful and always smiling. At the same time, she was determined and constantly working towards her goals and dreams. On December 24, 2022, her sister Lucy flew in from Dubai to spend the holidays with their family, and Edwards eagerly awaited her return. To celebrate this special occasion, Edwards, her sister, and their friends decided to go to the local pub in Liverpool's Wallasey Village, UK. Here they were having a fantastic time, laughing, dancing, and singing karaoke in a joyful atmosphere. Without their knowledge, someone with ill intentions was nearby. As they exited the pub at approximately 11:50 p.m., someone placed an emergency call. Shortly thereafter, a minimum of 12 shots were fired. Edwards was struck by 2 bullets, and she's suffering a severe head wound. The emergency services were immediately dispatched to the scene. They quickly loaded Edwards into an ambulance and rushed her to the local hospital. Unfortunately, she succumbed to her injuries en route, as they were fatal. When the police informed Edwards's family of the tragedy, they were shocked and disbelieving. No one could comprehend how this could have happened to Edwards, a beautiful and lively young woman. It was unthinkable that she could have had enemies who wished her harm. In the early stages of the investigation, detectives had no leads. The attacker launched a surprise assault and then quickly disappeared, leaving behind a single shell casing in the victim, who was severely bleeding at the location where the crime occurred. The assault was swift yet clearly premeditated, affording Edwards no opportunity for survival. However, it was unclear whether the attacker meant to target Edwards or if Edwards was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and got hurt by someone who was mentally unstable. A car of unknown origin pulled up near the entrance of the pub, and shortly thereafter, gunfire erupted. Apart from the fatality, 4 other men sustained gunshot wounds of varying degrees. All of the victims were young adults, aged between 22 and 33. Police initially believed Edwards may have been a random victim of the attack. It was known that criminal gangs operated in the area and the shooting might have been a confrontation between gang members. However, this was just speculation that needed to be confirmed or ruled out during the investigation. To learn more, the detectives looked into Edwards's background. Like the witnesses, Edwards's relatives had no idea who would want she dead. The detectives planned to speak with more witnesses and those who had been shot at by the unknown criminal. They also asked the pub owner for security footage. The investigation involves conducting interviews with numerous individuals and thoroughly reviewing extensive video footage. Multiple police officers were working on the case. It was necessary to answer several difficult questions following the attack. The large number of victims raised concerns about whether the attack was a spontaneous act of aggression or a targeted assault. To investigate, all witnesses were interviewed, and authorities began analyzing mobile communications data, which proved to be a time-consuming task. The media was alerted to aid in the investigation. Law enforcement officers appealed to the public for assistance, urging anyone with valuable information to come forward and visit the police station. Specifically, they were looking for any video recordings that might have been taken by eyewitnesses, which could potentially show the car used by the perpetrator. To encourage people to share any relevant information, the police held a meeting with local residents. It was assumed that someone might have witnessed the attack or have information about the perpetrator. To encourage people to come forward, community leaders reassured residents that they should not be intimidated by the criminals or the local feuding clans. The police visited residents door to door to gather information and provide support. Specially trained officers worked with Edwards's family to provide emotional support during this difficult time. Through their efforts, it was discovered that the perpetrator had left the pub parking lot in a dark-colored car. Although witness accounts were limited due to the darkness, the vehicle was most likely a dark Mercedes. Later, outdoor surveillance cameras confirmed the events. The killer drove into the parking lot, but didn't immediately open fire. Instead, he observed the pub visitors for some time from his car, which was positioned to give him a clear view of the entrance and most of what was happening inside. He seemed to be waiting for the most convenient moment to attack. After a few minutes, when Edwards got out, the killer quickly got out of the car, fired 12 shots in a row, then immediately got back in and drove away. Investigators studied the recordings and concluded that the attacker acted alone, without any backup. Unfortunately, it was impossible to determine exactly where the perpetrator fled. The detectives conducted a thorough investigation, going door to door to speak with local residents, providing a detailed description of the car and the circumstances surrounding the incident. Their goal was to identify the killer. The streets were patrolled 24/7, and within 2 days, they had detained 2 suspects. However, their involvement in the crime couldn't be proven without proof. The detectives then made a public statement, vowing to continue their pursuit of the unknown shooter until they were brought to justice. This was intended to reassure local residents, who were outraged by the rising crime rates and the authorities' seeming inability to stop it. There was speculation that the attack may have been sparked by a feud between local gangs, with Edwards being an innocent bystander. However, this theory was still unconfirmed and required further investigation. It was determined that the intended targets of the shooting may have been Jake and Curran, 2 members of the local Beechwood gang who were at the pub that evening. They had a long-standing and intense feud with another group vying for control of the territory. On December 29th, police arrested a person of interest, but he was not the shooter. Although he had a solid alibi, the detective suspected that he may have been involved in planning the attack. Around the same time, authorities identified the dark Mercedes car used by the killer to leave the pub's parking lot. However, due to a lack of direct evidence, the name of a third suspect was not released. The car was tracked through surveillance footage and identified with the help of cameras. However, the police were unable to respond in time. On December 31st, a report was filed with the police department stating that a fire had started near the scene of the shooting. When the special services arrived at the scene, they found a dark Mercedes engulfed in flames, which resembled the perpetrator's vehicle. The fire had completely burned out the vehicle, destroying valuable evidence. It's clear the perpetrators knew the police were closing in, so they intentionally destroyed one of the key pieces of evidence. Although the fire didn't completely destroy the car, investigators confirmed it was used during the shooting. However, the Mercedes had been stolen shortly before the attack and didn't belong to the perpetrators. The arson was likely committed to hinder the investigation. Following the January 11th murder, police took 2 more suspects into custody in Central Wales: Connor Chapman, 22, and the 23-year-old woman. Connor was a familiar figure to police, with his extensive criminal record. Before the murder of Edwards, Connor began his downward spiral into a life of crime with increasingly bold lawbreakings. His early offenses included a car theft under severe circumstances, and he was repeatedly suspected of robbery, hooliganism, and making threats. At one point, Connor led police on a high-speed chase before ditching the car and hiding in nearby bushes. Upon being caught, he feigned innocence, claiming he had no idea what the officers were talking about and was simply waiting for a friend. This brazen act earned him a degree of notoriety, landing his details in newspaper headlines. Connor Chapman, a resident of Birkenhead, Liverpool, was raised by his grandparents after being abandoned by his parents at a young age. He moved into their house and struggled academically, eventually dropping out of high school before his exams. As a teenager, Connor was considered a troublemaker and had his first brush with the law in 2014, when he was 14 years old, for shoplifting. 2 years later, in 2016, Connor committed another offense by stealing a car. He was caught driving the stolen vehicle without a license or insurance, violating the terms of his suspended sentence. In 2017, he was convicted of possession of a controlled substance, while also violating a restraining order by entering areas of the city he was banned from, all under police surveillance. Connor was prohibited from appearing in public due to the risk he posed to society. However, in 2018, he disregarded the ban and was detained by the authorities while in possession of a knife and banned substances. The same year, Connor Chapman came to the attention of the general public after a failed attempt to evade the police in a stolen vehicle. The incident occurred when the city patrols spotted a stolen Audi and instructed the driver to stop and exit the vehicle with hands raised. However, 18-year-old Connor refused to comply, leading to a pursuit. During the brief chase, Connor committed multiple traffic offenses, including exceeding 80 km/h in 30 km/h zones, repeatedly driving into oncoming traffic, and ultimately crashing into the curb at high speed. The impact sent the car careening to the side and spinning around. Unable to continue, Connor exited the vehicle and fled on foot. However, the patrol caught up with him in the bushes just a few hundred meters away. Connor claimed he was waiting for a friend, but it was clear he was not telling the truth. In court, Connor's lawyer explained that his client had been influenced by a group of older friends who were a bad influence. The court decided not to punish Connor and released him. It was discovered that he had attention deficit disorder, along with several other conditions, which were diagnosed by a private specialist. Connor in question was sentenced to up to 8 months in prison due to numerous traffic violations and reckless behavior. Additionally, he was banned from driving after his release. By the time he reached adulthood, he had accumulated 14 convictions for 30 separate offenses, demonstrating a clear pattern of disregard for the law and social norms. It is clear that he has no intention of reforming and constantly refuses to conform to the rules and norms of society. Although his behavior was recognized as potentially hazardous, there were no sufficient legal grounds to isolate him from the community, primarily because his actions had not yet resulted in serious harm to anyone. The public expressed anger and frustration with the authorities for not taking action against Connor Chapman, a man with multiple convictions. Despite his numerous run-ins with the law, he continued to commit crimes, putting innocent lives at risk. In January 2020, he was sentenced to 10 months in prison for possession of a cold weapon and substances in a public place. The police publicly warned the community about him, and after serving his sentence, he was wanted for at least 5 more crimes. When caught, Connor boasted about spending more time in prison than out, seemingly proud of his record. By 20, he had accumulated 19 sentences for 43 crimes. However, he was released again in the summer of 2022, just 6 months before the death of L. Edwards. During this time, he appeared in court again, and his lawyer attempted to garner sympathy by sharing that Connor's first child was born while he was in prison. At this point, Connor's girlfriend was pregnant with a baby girl. He claimed to have turned his around and wanted to make amends, but this was just a ruse. In reality, he wanted to escape and return to his life of crime. The police were already aware of his involvement with a local gang that sold prohibited substances, but he was being tried for a lesser offense, the burglary and theft of 2 electric motorcycles. On December 24th, a violent altercation erupted between 2 rival gangs in Beechwood Estates, near the wooden church. The gangs were fighting over territory, but failed to reach an agreement. Seeking revenge, a young gangster armed himself with a submachine gun and waited 3 hours to track down his targets, Kieran and Jake Duffy, who were at the Moke pub. Just before midnight, he drove to the parking lot, identified his victims, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Then he exited the car and fired 12 bullets into the building. Duffy was seriously injured, but he survived despite the life-threatening attack. However, L. Edwards was not as fortunate. She was hit by 2 bullets in the head. Edwards fought for her life, but she died in the medic's arms on the way to the hospital. Edwards had unintentionally crossed paths with the killer's targets that evening and had no idea the night would end so tragically. The pub was crowded at the time of the attack, 1 person was killed, and 4 others were wounded. A 22-year-old man was shot in the leg, a 24-year-old man was wounded in the arm, and a 33-year-old man was injured in the wrist. Fortunately, none of these injuries were life-threatening. Edwards's friends tried to provide her with first aid and perform CPR at the scene. Unfortunately, their efforts were not enough to save her life. Edwards's sister, Lucy, was much luckier. She had been living in Dubai and had flown home to celebrate Christmas with her family just minutes before the attack. She had already left the pub, so she was not affected at all. Later, Lucy recalled how she had wanted to take her sister with her, but Edwards had wanted to stay with her friends. On January 25, 2023, a funeral was held for Edwards, who was tragically killed in a gang-related incident. Hundreds of people attended to pay their respects to the innocent victim. A hearse pulled by 4 white horses carried her body to the local church. As a sign of respect, the pub where she had last celebrated was closed for the day. The pub's owner also shared a message of support for her family on social media. Connor Chapman was subsequently charged with multiple offenses, including murder. It was discovered that Connor had an accomplice, 20-year-old Thomas. A video recording was found on Thomas during the searches, made shortly before the attack. In the video, Connor is seen handing over a weapon and stating his intention to settle accounts with someone. After the attack, Connor and Thomas hid the stolen Mercedes together, planning to dispose of it later. Although the murder weapon was never found, DNA traces from the killer were detected on one of the shell casings. It became clear that Connor had loaded the weapon before the attack, as evidenced by the presence of red gloves found at his house, which were visible in CCTV footage from Moke. After committing the crime, Connor and Thomas abandoned their car and ordered a taxi under a false name to throw off investigators. They used the taxi service to cover their tracks. At approximately 5 a.m., they went back to the location where they had hidden the car in order to take additional steps to cover their tracks and hide their involvement. Thomas Nord was found guilty of all charges in July 2023 and received a 9 years prison sentence. The relatively lenient sentence was due to his limited prior criminal history compared to Connor. Jake and Kieran, members of the local Beechwood gang, were wounded during the attack but managed to survive. Given their gang affiliation and the ongoing conflict with a rival group, the violent incident was not unexpected. It became known that on December 23, 2023, Connor Chapman's group, including Kieran and his friend, were attacked and beaten by another individual from the same group. Although they did not receive serious injuries, this incident occurred just a day before they were attacked with firearms. At the time, they seemed to view the beating as a random altercation and subsequently went to a pub to relax. After the shooting incident, while the shooter, Connor, awaited sentencing for the murder of an innocent victim, Kieran and his friend were already imprisoned. Kieran received a 27-month sentence for attacking members of a rival criminal group and an additional 9 months for the fight. His friend was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months for a similar offense. It appeared that Kieran and his friend were attempting to avenge the attempted murder. As a result, prohibitive court orders were issued against them, imposing various restrictions. Although this approach did not prevent the gang from engaging in further criminal activities, it did provide a basis for more severe punishment if they continued to disregard the court orders. The public was outraged that gang members received lenient sentences despite committing multiple crimes. It became clear that the existing bans were ineffective in maintaining public safety. For instance, Connor was banned from visiting the area where the pub was located, but he still managed to steal a car and enter the pub despite having a driving ban. During the trial for L. Edwards' murder, Connor attempted to dispute the claim that he was the person seen in the CCTV footage. He claimed that at the time, he was at home wrapping Christmas gifts. Nevertheless, sufficient evidence was collected to expose the facts. The hearings lasted 3.5 weeks, exposing all the incident leading up to the attack. It was discovered that the motive behind the attack was a turf war between two rival gangs. Connor had no connection to L. Edwards, he was completely indifferent to her fate, as well as the fate of the other innocent people in the bar. He was driven solely by uncontrolled rage. After attempting to murder two rivals, Connor planned to escape to Spain to evade capture. He used a stolen car and disposed of the murder weapon, trying to avoid detection by the police. He also avoided using public transportation. Ultimately, detectives apprehended Connor at the airport. After being arrested, Connor attempted to mislead the police by stating that the Mercedes he was seen driving on the day of the murder was not stolen. Instead, he claimed it was a shared vehicle used by his criminal group for distributing substances. He denied being the driver and continued to try to convince the jury that he was not the one who opened fire that evening. In a desperate bid to escape the consequences, Connor claimed he had only just discovered that someone from his group had used the vehicle to attack the pub. Before the jury deliberated on the verdict, L. Edwards' father gave a heartfelt speech, expressing his hope that the perpetrator would never be able to spend Christmas with his loved ones as a free man again. The jurors, comprised of P. Asen and Sim Janine, reached a unanimous verdict after 3 hours of deliberation. They found Connor Chapman guilty of all charges, citing that he had committed the crime with callous disregard and showed no remorse for the accidental killing of L. Edwards, taking away her promising life. Rather than showing regret, Connor spent several days systematically eliminating all evidence and traces of the murder that could implicate him. The motive behind the attack was attributed to a rivalry between criminal gangs. On July 7, 2023, Connor was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after serving 48 years of his sentence. After the verdict was announced, L. Edwards's father raised his fist in triumph. However, the incident sparked widespread public outrage. The city's residents felt unsafe knowing they were caught in the middle of a turf war between rival gangs. These gangs possessed a large number of firearms and had shown a willingness to use them, as evidenced by L. Edwards's murder. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jane Hilton. Jane was a familiar face in El Dorado Hills, California. She wrote for the Foothill Times and often reported on local social events. Jane had 6 children, whom she loved dearly and often inspired through her daily poetry. After earning her real estate license, she married Archie Hilton in 1984, but the marriage fell apart in July 1985. Seeking help, Jane approached her former boss, Will McLean, who owned a large house in El Dorado Hills. Will's daughter, Maureen Klein, lived there with her boyfriend. Will's nephew, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, were also staying in another room in the house. On July 6, 1985, Will invited Jane and his youngest daughter, Autumn Anchor, to live in his house. Will's house was crowded and had a lot of people coming and going. However, Jane and Autumn's first night there would be their last. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, 20, and his girlfriend Connie Dahl, 19, returned from a party and found Autumn wandering around outside. Autumn said she had been attacked and feared her mother would be angry. The 3 of them then went inside, where they found traces of blood in the hallway. When they entered the first room, which belonged to Ricky's mother, Maureen, the air became quiet. On the bed, they found the bloody body of Jane Hilton. She had stopped breathing. Because Maureen and her boyfriend were away on a camping trip and were not home at the time, Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived at the scene, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had been stabbed 29 times, beaten, and bitten on the shoulder. This senseless murder led investigators to begin questioning those closest to Jane. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was at the top of the list of suspects. He was interviewed and provided a solid alibi, including DNA. Initially, Archie Hilton was the logical choice because their marriage was in trouble. However, he said that although they were having some difficulties, there was no sign that he and Jane were going to divorce. When Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl were interviewed, they both said that they came home early in the morning and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet soaked in blood. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom, where they found Jane lying dead on the bloody mattress. The details and physical evidence in the case were scant, and the potential suspects all had alibis. The case gradually went cold. The cold case was reopened in 1999, and El Dorado County Sheriff's Department detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald were assigned to investigate. After a thorough review of the case file, they focused on a newspaper article about Connie Dahl, Ricky Davis's ex-girlfriend and Jane Hilton's roommate. In the article, Connie described the position of Jane's body when she was found, lying on the bed, as if someone had placed her in her usual sleeping position. However, this testimony contradicted Ricky Davis's earlier statement. Ricky had said on the recording that the body was found on the floor. But at the time, detectives thought they heard Ricky say that, but they weren't sure. Detectives questioned Connie for 3 hours. At first, she stuck to her story. But over the next 18 months, Connie was questioned 4 times. Each time, the detectives used techniques known to increase the likelihood of a false confession. They accused Connie of her role in the murder, and she was threatened with being charged with murder. As a result, Connie cooperated with the detectives, even though she had no actual role in the case. She was convicted of manslaughter and only served 1 year in prison. Detective Strasser and Fitzgerald lied to Connie, telling her that they would use DNA evidence to identify a suspect. In fact, no DNA evidence was collected or tested in this case. Instead, the investigators used crime scene photos and real events, such as the bite mark on Jane's shoulder, to provide information to Connie and guide her to recall events the way they wanted. Over the course of 4 interviews, Connie began to lose control and recall events from the case. However, this also allowed her to create a completely different story about the night of the murder, based on what she remembered and what investigators gave her. Connie Dahl gave conflicting accounts of Jane Hilton's murder. In one interview, she claimed that Autumn Anker was present at the crime scene and was shot. In another interview, she admitted that she may have bitten Jane's shoulder. Connie also claimed that the murder began with an argument between Ricky Davis and Jane, which stemmed from Ricky's desire for Autumn to join them at a party, which Jane refused. Despite changing her story to fit the facts, Connie could not recall the murder weapon or where it was hidden. However, she implicated her ex-boyfriend Ricky Davis in the case, making him the prime suspect. Following Connie's confession, detectives interviewed Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker. Both stuck to their original accounts of the case. The detectives attempted to deceive Ricky by telling him that Autumn had also implicated him in the murder, but he did not change his story. Autumn told the detectives that she had no reason to protect Ricky and would not be swayed by threats of charges. Despite using coercive interrogation techniques, the detectives were unable to get Ricky or Autumn to change their statements. Therefore, they used Connie's confession to arrest Ricky. Connie accepted a plea bargain, agreeing to testify against Ricky in exchange for a reduced sentence. At Ricky's first trial, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, leading to a retrial. However, at his second trial in 2005, the jury found him guilty. During the trial, Connie took the stand and testified against Ricky. She explained that she had wrestled with Jane and accidentally bit her shoulder. Connie then walked out, leaving Ricky alone with Jane. Once outside, she heard Jane screaming, pleading, and gagging as Ricky continued to assault her. Ricky was sentenced to 16 years in prison for second-degree murder, largely based on Connie's testimony. Connie, on the other hand, received a reduced sentence of manslaughter and a 1-year sentence in county jail. Unfortunately, she died of a drug overdose in 2014. Despite his conviction, Ricky maintained his innocence. In 2006, he contacted the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP, for help in proving his innocence. NCIP, a nonprofit founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rodolphi and Linda Starr, provides DNA testing services to convicted prisoners who claim innocence. Ricky's case was reopened in 2006 after he contacted NCIP. NCIP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office worked together to retest DNA from the crime scene. The retesting included Hilton's nightgown and biological material found under her fingernails. The retesting uncovered a DNA profile from an unidentified male. This DNA was found on both Hilton's fingernails and nightgown, indicating that they came from the same source. The results cleared Ricky, Connie, and Anker of any crimes. This also proved that Connie's testimony was false. The DNA test results also proved Archie Hilton innocent, but unfortunately, he had passed away by the time the results were released. The unidentified DNA profile was entered into the FBI's CODIS database, but no matches were found. While the new evidence supports Ricky's claim of innocence, there are still obstacles to overcome. NCIP successfully argued that if the DNA test results had been presented at Ricky's trial, the outcome might have been different. In California, the standard for overturning a conviction typically requires new evidence that clearly establishes innocence. This standard is extremely difficult to meet. An expert on false confessions, Richard Leo, reviewed the transcript of Connie Dahl's interview in 2015. He found that detectives used pressure techniques to force Connie to give a false confession that fit the detectives' preconceived ideas about Jane Hilton's murder. Then, in 2016, the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP, helped sponsor Senate Bill 1134, which was intended to address these issues. The bill allows wrongfully convicted people like Ricky to prove that new evidence could convince a jury. It was passed in January 2017, after NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a motion for a new trial based on new DNA evidence. The bill was sponsored by former California State Senator Mark Leno and brings California standards in line with those of 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malakian overturned Ricky's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. It was originally scheduled to begin in the fall of 2019, but due to the health of his defense attorney, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020. However, the trial date changed again. Advances in DNA testing helped Ricky become the first person in California and only the second person in the United States to be exonerated of a crime. A new DNA testing method called genetic genealogy helped achieve this result. Genetic genealogy is a new DNA testing method that involves taking DNA evidence from the crime scene and sending it to genetic companies. These companies then search genealogical databases to find a potential match. In February 2020, the DNA evidence matched a man. In February 2020, El Dorado County District Attorney Vern Pearson announced that a new suspect had been identified in the death of Jane Hilton. The man was identified through DNA evidence collected from the crime scene. Following his arrest, several residents who knew the man revealed his identity to the media. The man is known as Michael Green, a longtime resident of Roseville, California. Michael graduated from Oakmont High School in 1986. According to those who knew him, Michael was a nice and easygoing person. They even described him as very calm and cool. So, a former friend of Michael could not understand why he would commit such a brutal act in El Dorado Hills. Michael was 17 years old at the time of the crime. On the night of July 6, 1985, Jane Hilton's daughter Autumn met Michael and his two friends, Calvin and Stephen, at a park. Autumn then decided to go home to shower and said she would come back to see her friends. However, she went to another friend's house instead of going back to the park. However, that evening, Autumn returned to the park to meet the boys again. What happened next is only speculation. Investigators believe Michael took advantage of the moment to break into Jane's home and was discovered by her. In the struggle to escape, Michael may have attacked Jane in a frenzy. After the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Ricky, Connie, and Autumn when they returned home. Michael had no criminal record before or after the murder. Michael appeared to have lived a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. Two other boys who were with Michael were sought shortly after his arrest. One boy, Calvin, had died some time ago. However, another boy, Stephen, was found and questioned the day after the arrest. Stephen is considered a witness, not a participant in the case. Michael was arrested on February 11, 2020. As Michael was a juvenile at the time of the murder, he made his first appearance in juvenile court on February 19, 2020. Michael was then transferred so that he could be tried as an adult. Michael waited 2.5 years before he was tried in court. On July 29, 2022, Michael pleaded no contest. This means that Michael waived his right to a jury trial, and he will face a charge of first-degree murder. He also waived his opportunity to object to the plea. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022, with Judge Suzanne Kingsbury presiding. During the sentencing hearing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor of educational psychology, was called to testify about adolescent development. Kaufman's research shows that adolescents have a variety of developmental needs, including emotional and cognitive development. In late adolescence, young people can distinguish between right and wrong, but their ability to control their emotions declines. To provide additional information, the defense called several witnesses from Michael's childhood who had maintained relationships with him into adulthood. When asked about their views of Michael after learning of his confession, all agreed that they were shocked he had committed the murder of Jane Hilton. Those who knew Michael described him as cheerful, well-liked, funny, and lovable, both before and after the murder. Michael's ex-wife, Karen Green, said Mike was not evil at all. After the witnesses finished testifying, each of Jane Hilton's children gave victim impact statements. All described the unforgivable loss Michael had caused their family. Heather Purvis McConnell, Jane Hilton's daughter, said, "The pain that will never go away will always haunt me." Ardith Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, said, "I loved my mother and I think Michael loved her too. I want to know how he would feel or what he would say to the person who stabbed your mother 29 times. What would you do if you got a call in the early morning to tell you your mother was dead?" Ardith recounted collecting her mother's belongings from the house where she was killed and ended with a powerful statement, "We will always have something in common, regret for the stupid decision you made 37 years ago." Hilton's son, Ian, echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the hardships the family faced and the constant nightmares they endured, especially after being wrongly blamed for her sister Autumn. As he finished, he broke down in tears and said, "All the words we say will never bring my mother back." Autumn was the last to speak. Her testimony showed real pain as she recounted what she had been through over the past 2 decades. She recounted the day 2 detectives came to her home, telling her they had found the people responsible for her mother's death. She was later accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn said that if she had not sought the help of a lawyer at the time, she doesn't know how far the investigators' intimidation tactics could have gone. Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he questioned Michael about why he killed Jane in such a brutal manner. "You hit her. She had multiple injuries around her head and face. You kicked her in the jaw. You bit her shoulder. Why did you do that?" Linden went on to read a statement expressing that Michael did not just kill Jane, he destroyed many lives in the process. Linden then asked Michael if he thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her accomplishments and the love she had for each of her children. In her closing argument, Michael's defense attorney, Margaret Husher, emphasized that Michael was not in control of his actions. Margaret argued that Michael did not realize that his actions were wrong because he was a teenager at the time. This argument was based on expert testimony from Dr. Kaufman. She asked the court to consider a reduced sentence, reading various criminal codes and court rules. However, Judge Kingsbury interjected and stated that the court would not consider granting Michael probation, leaving the defense unable to add any further comment. In response, Linden thanked the court and said that the request for probation was an insult. He said it was like a slap in the face to the victim's family, who had suffered for decades. Linden stated that Michael had gotten away with murder for 37 years and that granting him probation would allow him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury has heard many arguments about juvenile murder cases. In her 26 years as a judge, she said the murder of Jane Hilton was the most brutal. Before sentencing, Kingsbury asked the victim's family to forgive them for the pain they have endured. She also hoped they would overcome their pain, as that was their mother's wish. Kingsbury encouraged Michael Green to use all the resources available to him in the California Department of Rehabilitation. She said Michael could achieve parole if he used those resources. Kingsbury also said Michael had a great side and that he had a lot to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Michael Green was sentenced to life in prison and is being held in the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution will be determined after further review by the court. Ricky Davis, who was wrongfully convicted of the murder, was released on February 13, 2020. He will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation. However, his attorney argues that this amount does not make up for the years of freedom he has lost. Ricky continues to sue the state for damages covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020, for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit is still pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644, which prohibits law enforcement officers from using threats, physical harm, deception, or manipulative interrogation tactics when interrogating people 17 years of age or younger. District Attorney Vern Pearson is calling on all law enforcement agencies to stop using intimidation tactics. He says the deceptive tactics that have been used for years will assume guilt and focus on getting a confession instead of getting the whole story. The El Dorado County DA's office will now dismiss any case where the main evidence is a confession obtained through threats, lies, or psychologically manipulative interrogation tactics. The measures are intended to ensure that no one is convicted based on a false, coerced confession like the one that Ricky Davis made. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Judy Blake Morlanen. Judy Blake was born on October 16, 1957, in Hancock, Michigan, into a conservative family. As the only daughter, Judy was loved dearly by her parents and two older brothers. Her parents, Dale and Mary Ann, were active members of the Redeemer Free Lutheran Church and also ran a successful business called Dale Service. Through this, they provided Judy with a comfortable life in a warm environment. In 1974, Judy met Bruce Morlanen. Both worked in the healthcare industry, with Judy as a nurse and Bruce as a support worker. The age difference was only 3 years, yet the two were complete opposites. While Judy was shy and gentle, Bruce was outgoing and confident. Judy's family was a little apprehensive about Bruce, but love helped Judy and Bruce convince their families, and they got married in 1978. In the following years, Judy's family tried to accept and make Bruce an integral part of her life. It seemed to work because Bruce got along well with Judy's family. Another happy turning point came in 1989 when Judy gave birth to their daughter, Elise. However, the joy and peace in their family life were short-lived. On November 29, 1992, after Thanksgiving, Judy and Bruce visited Judy's family and brought Elise with them. It was also the last day of hunting season in the Upper Peninsula. Bruce and Judy's brothers went into the nearby woods to hunt deer on Sunday morning, while Judy stayed at home with her mother and Elise. Judy took her Springer Spaniel and her parents' dog, Streak, for a walk in the woods behind the Blake home on Highway 38 in Ontonagon County, Michigan. When Judy's mother, Mary Ann, said goodbye to her daughter, she had no idea it would be the last time she would see her. 2.5 hours passed without Judy, and Mary Ann became worried. Although Judy was familiar with the woods, the possibility of an accident or trouble was concerning, especially since hunting was still ongoing. A neighbor joined Mary Ann in searching for Judy. As it grew dark, the two women had difficulty following Judy's footprints along the trail. After nearly an hour of searching, Mary Ann came across a terrifying sight. On one of the trails in the woods, Mary Ann saw Judy lying motionless. The dogs were still circling the area. When they tried to turn Judy over, they found a terrible wound and bleeding in her chest, indicating that Judy was no longer alive. When Mary Ann discovered Judy's death, she ran home and reported the incident to the local authorities. Investigators soon determined that Judy had died from a gunshot wound. Although the night was getting colder, the police decided to search the woods with flashlights in hand. However, after searching the entire area, they still did not find many clues, including the bullet that killed Judy. However, they did find one important trace, a burn mark on a maple tree. Detective Bob Ball, who was in charge of the case, believed that the burn mark could have been caused by the bullet that killed Judy. He hoped that if the bullet was found, it would shed some light on the case. Forensic tests later confirmed that the burn mark was indeed caused by a bullet. Based on the position of the body in the burn marks, investigators concluded that the bullet struck Judy first, passed through her heart, exited her body through her left side, hit a tree, and eventually landed somewhere in the woods. Initially, the incident was ruled a tragic accident. Investigators believed that a stray bullet from an unknown hunter killed Judy, which was not unusual in the area. However, determining who was responsible for Judy's death was a difficult task, as bullets from high-powered rifles can often travel 3 miles or more. Most of the time, hunters don't realize that their bullets have killed a person. While Judy's body is being taken to the medical examiner's office, the detectives begin interviewing family members. Everyone seems deeply saddened by the tragedy, but an unusual statement from Bruce makes Detective Bob uncomfortable. Bruce criticizes Judy for not being more careful. Bruce becomes a suspect because, in most brutal cases, the person closest to the victim is usually the suspect. However, Detective Bob also knows that Bruce may just be a husband trying to hide his grief. Bruce's brothers claim that Bruce was with them all day, and they are certain that he had nothing to do with Judy's death. They are even unhappy with the police for considering Bruce a suspect. After 2 days, the autopsy report reveals an important detail about the time of death, estimating it at around 3 p.m. When Detective Bob returns to interview Judy's family again with this new information, Bruce's relatives reveal that although Bruce was with them for most of the day, they did not see him at a particular time. Judy's family, however, remains completely convinced of his innocence. They believe the investigation is flawed in accusing a man who is still grieving the loss of his wife. However, they do not know that the detectives have their own reasons for believing that Judy's death was not an accident. By analyzing the trajectory of the bullet and forensic evidence, investigators find that the bullet entered the body at an upward angle. This is a significant finding because if Judy had been shot by a hunter, the bullet would have entered the body at a downward angle. This raises the suspicion that Judy's death was a targeted murder. However, one question remains: was the killer really Bruce? To verify their suspicions, the detectives decide to summon Bruce for a thorough investigation. On December 11, 1992, just 12 days after the investigation began, Bruce is invited to the sheriff's office for a formal interview. After a brief interview with Detective Bob, Bruce recounts in detail where he had been on the day his wife died and provides the names of nearly 30 people who witnessed his presence that day. However, there is a suspicious 30-minute gap in Bruce's itinerary on the day of the incident that he cannot explain. Despite his repeated claims of having nothing to do with his wife's death, this gap causes Detective Bob to begin questioning what Bruce might be hiding. The truth about Bruce's guilt remains unclear, but his behavior raises suspicions. After his wife's death, Bruce does not spend much time on the funeral. Over the following weeks, he goes skiing, hangs out with friends, and even flirts with some of his deceased wife's friends instead of taking care of his daughter. This causes Judy's family to begin suspecting Bruce, although they initially supported him. Bruce's behavior is the cause of this suspicion. The police are actively investigating the case but have not yet found any concrete evidence against him. To gain information, Detective Bob asks some of Bruce's friends and colleagues to secretly follow him and report back to the police if they see anything suspicious. This method of surveillance reveals an important detail. One of the people asked to follow Bruce is Gail, a 35-year-old colleague. She has a remarkable story to tell the detectives about Bruce. Shortly after the funeral, Bruce shows up uninvited at Gail's house, carrying 5 boxes filled with his deceased wife's belongings. After placing the boxes on Gail's porch, Bruce left before Gail could ask for more information. Since it was the holidays, Gail left the boxes outside for a while without paying attention to them. When she opened the boxes, she discovered that most of them were filled with Judy's clothes. But in one of the boxes, under the pile of clothes, Gail found a letter written 6 months earlier and signed by Judy. Finding this letter was a surprise to Gail, as she had only met Judy once. What was even stranger was the content of the letter. The letter began with Judy's request that Gail keep her old clothes as a souvenir, as she believed that Gail was the only person Bruce trusted. The letter then went into many intimate details about Bruce and Judy's marriage, about why they were no longer compatible and were on the verge of divorce. The letter even mentioned that Bruce needed a new girlfriend. The strangest thing about the letter was that the writer ended by praising Bruce's ability in bed. The letter immediately made Gail feel that something was wrong. The detectives felt the same way. To verify the authenticity of the letter, they showed it to forensic examiner James Stegall. He was tasked with comparing the letter to a sample of Judy's handwriting to see if it was really written by Judy. Handwriting analysis revealed that the handwriting in the letter indicated the speed of the writer, appearing slow and deliberate, which could be a sign of forgery. Judy was ruled out as the author of the letter, but it was also impossible to definitively confirm that the handwriting was Bruce's. With no conclusive evidence against Bruce, the detectives had to rely on limited resources to find more information. Detective Bob decided to continue interviewing Gail. Gail revealed that Bruce had been trying to get her attention for a long time, even before Judy's death. However, Gail, who is happily married, only sees Bruce as a nuisance. Bruce constantly flirts, but Gail deliberately ignores him and hopes he will give up. Gail is not the only one who dislikes Bruce. No one has a good word to say about him. At work, he often flirts with other female employees, causing everyone to try to stay away. His colleagues complain that he is difficult to work with. Gail also reveals that after his wife passed away, he bragged about being rich. According to Gail, this was just his attempt to seduce her. This information makes Detective Bob interested in investigating Bruce's marriage. They speculate that Bruce and Judy often quarrel because of Bruce's habit of flirting at work, but it is uncertain whether Judy is aware of Bruce's behavior towards female colleagues at work. However, the detective also discovered that Bruce and Judy's financial problems, caused primarily by Bruce's irresponsibility in overspending, had occurred in the months leading up to Judy's death. Bruce was deeply in debt, and the situation had become so serious that he was forced to borrow money from one place to pay off another. Judy had always managed her finances well throughout the marriage with her income, but she eventually began to resent Bruce, especially when she was given the added responsibility of caring for their daughter. The detectives discovered that a few weeks before Judy's death, Bruce had begun taking out multiple insurance policies in Judy's name, some of which had a double payout clause if Judy died in an accident. Detective Bob wondered if Bruce saw this as an opportunity to solve his financial problems and get out of the marriage with Judy. In fact, after Judy's death, Bruce was due to receive $330,000 from her insurance policies. What made investigators shudder was that in 1991, nearly 14 months before Judy's death, she had suffered a horrific accident. An 85-pound chimney block accidentally fell from the roof where Bruce was working, hitting Judy in the head and nearly killing her. Fortunately, she survived the attack, although she suffered a severe concussion and was hospitalized for several days. In another shocking development, a fire broke out in her house while Judy was sleeping alone. Fortunately, Judy woke up in time, called the fire department, and escaped once again. After these two incidents, Judy was very frightened. Some of Judy's friends told detectives that she had expressed her intention to leave her husband. Although she had a premonition that something was wrong, she stayed for the sake of her daughter. Judy's family was unaware of her feelings. At this point, Detective Bob Ball was almost certain that Bruce had killed his wife and deliberately staged it as a hunting accident, but he lacked physical evidence. He contacted Dan Castle, a metal detector expert who had helped the police many times before. Knowing that the fatal bullet might still be somewhere in the woods, Detective Bob asked Dan Castle to find it. Dan worked with his metal detector every day, but after searching for weeks without finding anything, he had a problem. The snow had covered up all traces of the bullet. Despite the setback, Dan was not ready to give up. He decided to experiment by using a slingshot to recreate the trajectory of the bullet and determine where it might have landed. Luckily, the idea worked. When he searched the area where his marble ricocheted in the snow, he found the bullet about 80 feet from a maple tree. The discovery of the bullet was important, but authorities needed to determine whether it was the bullet that killed Judy or just another bullet fired during hunting season. Ray Kenny, a firearms examiner from the Marquette State Police Crime Lab, was assigned to analyze the bullet. A few days later, he discovered some important details. It was a .30 caliber bullet from a Moss rifle, and it contained wood fibers. Kenny determined that this was the bullet that had hit the tree, but there was more evidence stuck inside. Kenny found a small pink fiber from Judy's shirt and some black fibers from her jacket. Finally, a crucial link was discovered, creating a major breakthrough in the case. Investigators then focused on Bruce's gun collection. They examined all the rifles that could have fired the bullet collected from the scene and identified 4 weapons that could have been involved. Bruce was forced to tell the truth, but he still chose to lie and denied owning any of the rifles. However, his luck ran out when Judy and Bruce's financial records showed a loan document that listed his gun collection as collateral. Detectives also found an asset list that included a gun that Bruce had not declared. It was a rifle with a scope, matching one of the 4 guns that could have fired the bullet. In the end, investigators concluded that the gun was probably the murder weapon. On April 23, 1993, after 5 months of investigation, Bruce agreed to take a polygraph test after many delays and evasions. During the first part of the test, Bruce calmly answered the investigators' questions. However, when the detectives placed Gail's letter in front of him, the interview took a critical turn. For the first time, Bruce changed his story and confessed to killing his wife after months of denial, perhaps because he realized Gail had cooperated with the police or feared that the authorities were finally closing in on him. With tears in his eyes, Bruce revealed that on November 29, 1992, he saw an opportunity to kill his wife. However, he said that the first 2 times he saw Judy from a distance, he aimed but could not shoot. The third time, he closed his eyes, pulled the trigger, and Judy was fatally shot. Bruce explained that his motive for killing Judy was her threat to divorce him, which he did not want to happen. He claimed that Judy was a strict wife both at work and at home, and was not good at cooking. Bruce said that he threw the rifle into a nearby river, but the police could not find it after searching the water. He also pointed out an error in the medical examiner's report. Although the report said Judy was shot on the left side of the chest, Bruce insisted that she was actually shot on the right side and the bullet exited the left side. This detail was crucial to his confession, as only the killer would know this. Bruce was immediately arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Surprisingly, despite his confession, he pleaded not guilty, claiming that the police had coerced him into confessing. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Bruce, prosecutors decided to seek more evidence in preparation for the trial. Investigators reenacted the moving of the chimney, which Bruce had previously said he had accidentally pushed with his foot. However, they discovered that the chimney was too heavy to have been moved accidentally and required a deliberate act to make it fall. With dozens of witnesses and a wealth of evidence, the trial swung in favor of the prosecution. During this time, Bruce barely moved but burst into tears when Gale took the stand to testify. The defense, on the other hand, had no witnesses to testify. Bruce's attorney, Thomas Castleman, said all of their witnesses refused to appear out of fear. He called the investigation a witch hunt and accused the police of improperly obtaining confessions. As expected, the jury did not believe Bruce's story, and on December 15, 1993, they returned a guilty verdict. On January 21, 1994, Bruce Moylannon was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence brought comfort to Judy's family. After the tragedy, Judy's brother and sister-in-law, David and Yvonne Blake, adopted 5-year-old Elise. Crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sajini. In December 2002, Thurun Jinaraj and Sajini Krishnan, a newlywed couple, started their life together. Thurun and Sajini's marriage was arranged, but the couple was very happy and were building a life together in their apartment. Thurun, a physical education teacher at a local school and a volleyball coach, his wife, Sajini, worked at a bank. Whenever Thurun went to watch volleyball, he would remind his wife, Sajini, that due to the unsafe burglary situation in the area, Sajini should go to her father's house instead of staying alone in their apartment. Sajini's father lived nearby, so she would go to her father's house whenever Thurun went to watch volleyball. On February 5, 2003, Sajini visited her father's house for the last time. Before leaving, she said that she needed money to fill up her car's gas tank. Sajini's father was surprised and asked if Thurun was taking good care of her. Sajini appeared angry and dismissed her father's concerns, saying, "Dad, there's no such thing." Her short reply made her father feel uncomfortable, thinking that it might just be a minor disagreement between the couple. On February 14, 2003, at 7:30 p.m., Sajini had a phone conversation with her sister that lasted about 15 minutes. 2 hours later, at about 9:30 p.m., Thurun contacted Sajini's father, informing him to come to the hospital immediately because Sajini's condition was critical. Family members rushed to the hospital and found that Sajini had passed away. Thurun was deeply moved and cried loudly. Sajini's cause of death was determined to be strangulation with a scarf. When the police arrived at the scene, Thurun reported that their house had been broken into, jewelry and money had been stolen, and belongings had been thrown around. Initially, the police suspected that the thieves might have killed Sajini when she discovered them. Thurun's emotional state was so shocked that he couldn't stop crying. His pain was too great, and as a result, his condition worsened. He was so distraught that he couldn't even attend Sajini's funeral. Due to his deteriorating condition, Thurun was hospitalized, where his family provided him with emotional support. Meanwhile, the police were working to identify potential suspects by compiling a list of known thieves in the area. On February 16, 2003, 2 days after Sajini's death, Thurun's brother contacted the police, informing them that Thurun had escaped from the hospital. The police were shocked to find that Thurun had escaped from the hospital. Initially, they had assumed that Thurun was completely innocent due to his poor condition, so the police did not assign anyone to closely monitor Thurun while he was in the hospital. However, Thurun's sudden disappearance aroused the police's suspicions. Sajini's family began questioning the police, demanding to know why they had let their guard down and allowed Thurun to escape. As the case attracted widespread media attention, the pressure on the police increased. They immediately launched a thorough search for Thurun. Meanwhile, Thurun's family was also brought in for questioning by the police, but they were released after a few days. Thurun lived with Sajini in an apartment, while the rest of his family lived elsewhere. A massive search operation was launched across the city to find Thurun. The police set up roadblocks at several locations. Despite these efforts, Thurun remained undetected. Pressure from Sajini's family on the police led to the announcement of a large reward for anyone providing information on Thurun's whereabouts. However, even this lucrative offer failed to yield any leads. Police searches were ultimately unsuccessful. It was later revealed that Thurun had been mistreating Sajini since their marriage, motivated by his extramarital affair with another woman. The police eventually tracked down the girl Thurun had been involved with. She told them that on February 16th, Thurun had called her and asked her to marry him. However, she had already learned about Sajini's death by then. As a result, she rejected Thurun's proposal outright, telling him she couldn't marry someone suspected of murder. After that, Thurun and the girl lost contact. Nearly 6 years passed without any update on Thurun from the police. The police kept a close watch on Thurun's family, thinking that he might contact or return home. However, Thurun did not see or contact his family during this time. The police discovered that exactly 6 years after the incident, Thurun had visited his parents in another state, but only briefly, as his father had passed away just a day later. Although the police expected Thurun to return for his father's funeral, Thurun did not return. In 2016, a new officer joined the department and reviewed the case file, asking for an update. The police informed him of the current situation, that Thurun's father had passed away, his mother was ill and living in Madhya Pradesh, and his brother lived in Ahmedabad, but there was still no information about Thurun's whereabouts. The police conducted another investigation by discreetly monitoring the area around Thurun's mother's house, looking for any young men who might visit her. Unfortunately, no leads were found. The police then decided to question the girl who had a relationship with Thurun. She reported that she had not had any contact with Thurun since the incident. However, some of her friends had recently mentioned to her that they thought they saw someone who looked like Thurun at a mall in Delhi. The police formed a team to investigate this new information and visited the mall in Delhi. They checked the footage from all the surveillance cameras, but could not find any evidence of Thurun. After receiving multiple reports of sightings of Thurun in various states, the police became increasingly convinced that he was still alive. They therefore launched a thorough investigation by analyzing around 4,000 mobile phone numbers linked to Thurun's family and friends, hoping to uncover a vital clue. Although their search did not yield any significant breakthroughs, the police were determined to find Thurun. They kept a close watch on his mother's phone, scrutinizing her calls to identify her contacts. Thurun's mother received a call on her mobile phone from a landline number in Bengaluru, also known as the Silicon Valley of India. The call originated from the customer care service of a Bengaluru-based Oracle company. This made the police wonder about the connection between Thurun's mother and the Oracle company. The police suspected that Thurun, whom they were looking for, might be working at the Oracle office in Bengaluru. A police team traveled from Ahmedabad to Bengaluru to investigate further. On October 22, 2018, police visited the Oracle office and met the HR department, but police did not disclose the real purpose of their visit. Instead, they informed the HR department that police needed a list of all employees for law and order purposes. The HR department cooperated and provided the police with a complete list of all Oracle employees. In order to avoid being detected by Thurun, the police had to be extremely careful in their approach, as they knew that Thurun would likely escape if he realized that the police were following him. The problem was, Thurun's name was not on the list that Oracle had provided to the police. This made them worry that their efforts might be in vain. However, one name on the list stood out, Parvin Batelli. When the police recalled that Thurun's mother often spoke to Parvin and his wife, Nisha, this connection piqued the police's interest, and they decided to gather more information about Parvin and Nisha in the hope of finding clues about Thurun. The police found it suspicious that Parvin and Nisha were not active on social media, as this is a rare phenomenon in today's digital age, when most people actively share their lives on social media. The police learned that Thuran's mother frequently talked to Parvin Batelli. In addition, Parvin and Nisha had 2 children. The police began to suspect that Parvin Batelli could be Thuran. Therefore, the police began to collect evidence against him. One feature of Thuran's finger during his time as a volleyball coach was a broken and slightly bent finger on his ring hand. On October 23rd, 2 policemen went to Oracle's customer service office in Bangalore to meet Parvin. When one of the policemen shook hands with Parvin, the policeman immediately recognized Thuran because of the familiar broken finger. The policeman said, "Thuran, your game is over." Upon hearing Thuran's name, Parvin's condition worsened. Thuran's mistake began when his cell phone stopped working, leaving him worried about his mother. Thuran used his office landline instead of a number he could safely use to contact his mother. This last mistake led to his arrest. If he had not used his office landline, the police likely would not have found him. Thuran was taken to Ahmedabad by the police, where he confessed to the crime, admitting to killing his wife Sajini Krishnan. Thuran shared the entire story with the police. After the murder, Thuran proposed to a friend, but was rejected. He then moved to Pune, took up a small job, and met Nisha. Thuran tricked Nisha into believing that he was an orphan with no family, after which the 2 got married. The couple moved to Bangalore in 2009, where Thuran began working for Oracle. After years of investigation and manhunt, Thuran Jinaraj was finally recaptured in 2019. In March 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder. Crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Neha Varma. Megha Deshpande lived with her 21-year-old daughter, Ashlesha, and her 70-year-old mother, Rohini, in a luxurious neighborhood called Srinagar in Indore. This city known for consistently ranking as one of the cleanest in India. The fact that they resided in Srinagar, an area predominantly inhabited by the wealthy, suggested that the Deshpande family was financially well off. Megha worked for a multi-level marketing (MLM) company for a considerable time. MLM is also referred to as network marketing, direct selling, and pyramid selling. To understand how an MLM business works, imagine a pyramid structure. At the top is the company owner. When the owner recruits 2 individuals, and they join the company, it creates a network. These 2 individuals then recruit more people to join the company, and the process continues. The company generates profit from each new member or associate that joins, allowing the business owner to constantly earn income through the growth of their network. Before moving to Indore, Megha lived in Yuan, a city approximately 35 miles away, with her husband, Nanai Deshpande. However, due to his job as a bank manager, Nanai remained in Yuan, while Megha relocated to Indore with her daughter and mother a few months ago. Thanks to Nanai's stable job and Megha's successful career in the MLM company, the Megha's family has a stable financial situation and does not have to worry about money. In the neighborhood where Megha lives, people are very united, and it is also very safe with very little crime. Residents have always felt safe, and nothing unusual has ever happened there until June 13, 2011, when that all changed. On that day, no one in Megha's family left the house until noon, and no one heard their voices. A neighbor walked by Megha's house, and then she noticed a very strange thing. Footprints made of bloody stains led around the house, alarming her. She quickly notified the landlord. And the landlord then knocked on the door several times, but received no answer. Next, the landlord attempted to look inside through a window and was met with a very scary sight. 3 women were lying on the floor, their bodies covered in blood. Overcome with fear, he quickly alerted the police. The brutal murder of the Megha family members sent shockwaves through the community. By the time the police arrived at the crime scene, a large crowd had gathered outside their house. Upon entering the house, the police officers were met with a gruesome scene: the bodies of 3 women who had been brutally murdered. The police secured the crime scene and began their investigation. During this process, they found 2 bullet shells inside the house. One of the shells was linked to the gunshot wound that killed Mega, who had been shot in the head. However, despite a thorough search of the house lobby, the police were unable to locate the second bullet. A forensic team was called in to collect evidence from the crime scene. The bodies of the 3 women were then sent for post-mortem examination. As news of the murder spread, the entire city of Indore was left reeling in shock. The post-mortem report later revealed that 21-year-old Ashlesha and her 70-year-old grandmother, Rohini, had died from excessive bleeding caused by multiple stab wounds inflicted on their bodies. This report confirms that Mega was the only one shot to death. However, it raises a crucial question for the police: if 2 bullet shells were found, who was the second shot intended for? Mega's husband, along with the public, also started pressuring the police, demanding that they solve the case quickly so that the criminals are held accountable to the fullest extent of Indian law. This makes it even more urgent for the police to solve this case quickly. To do this, several teams were deployed to investigate. One team analyzed the call detail records of the 3 victims, Mega, Ashlesha, Rohini. Another team re-examined the forensic evidence. Initially, the police have collected a blood sample from the crime scene that didn't belong to Mega, Ashlesha, or Rohini. The police then detained and questioned various suspects from the surrounding area. Based on the evidence collected, the police have recorded this as a robbery and murder case. Further investigation of the phone records revealed that there was a phone number that had called Mega multiple times, and she had long conversations with this number. After obtaining detailed information about the number, the police found it was registered to a girl named Neha. They then began tracking her location to gather potential leads in the case. One day, the police located Neha near an ATM in the area. They promptly sent a team to bring her to the police station for questioning. After being informed of the situation of the case, Neha was left astounded. She explained that she initially met Mega at a shopping mall. Then, Neha had bumped into Mega while rushing, causing Mega to drop some items. As Neha apologized and helped Mega gather her belongings, they engaged in conversation and developed a rapport. And Neha even driving Mega to her car, marking the start of their friendship. Neha also discovered that Mega worked for a multi-level marketing, MLM, company. After exchanging phone numbers, they occasionally spoke over the phone. Neha's interest in the MLM business model led her to discuss it with Mega. However, the police found Neha's story suspicious, as her words didn't match her body language. As a result, the police questioned her forcefully and in a confrontational manner. Neha initially tries to hide her dishonesty, but under intense police questioning, she confesses. She then told the police a story that even surprised them. Neha Varma was a 23-year-old beautician who was known for her beauty and cheerful personality. Her father, a van driver, had limited financial resources, making it challenging for Neha to pursue her dreams. During this time, Neha met Rahul, and they developed a close friendship that blossomed into romance. At 24, Rahul was handsome but also struggled financially. Despite their similar financial situations, they deeply loved each other and wanted to get married. They sought opportunities to rapidly build wealth and achieve a comfortable lifestyle, securing their financial future. Neha and Mega met for the first time. Mega, who had a taste for expensive jewelry, was wearing gold ornaments that day. Neha perceived Mega as wealthy due to her jewelry and decided to approach her. Neha started approaching Mega by deliberately bumping into her, start chatting and befriending her. Neha started thinking about robbing Mega after getting to call her through phone calls. Neha then shared her plan with her boyfriend Rahul, telling him that Megha was extremely wealthy, making her an easy target. Rahul liked the idea, as it would solve their financial problems and allow them to live comfortably once they were married. Following this, Rahul started making plans to kill Megha and the 2 other women in her house. He thought that if he could get away with the crime without anyone finding out, no one would be able to file a complaint against them. Rahul finalized his plan but needed a gun to carry it out. Luckily for him, his friend Manoj, who was close to both Rahul and Neha, had a gun. Rahul had been planning to kill Megha and her family, and he was waiting for the perfect moment to execute his plan. That moment arrived on June 13, 2011. On that day, Neha called Megha and expressed interest in joining her multi-level marketing scheme, MLM. Unbeknownst to Megha, this was a ruse orchestrated by Rahul. Neha arrived at Megha's house early in the morning, and Megha asked her to fill out a membership form. However, Neha didn't know what information to fill in the form, so she asked Megha if she could get a friend arrive to help her. Megha agreed, and Neha then called Rahul, as planned. Rahul and his accomplice, Manoj, were waiting for Neha's call, and they immediately went to Megha's house. Once Rahul entered the house, he pulled out a gun and shot Megha at point-blank range, killing her instantly. The sound of this gunshot reached Ashlesha and Rohini, causing both of them to run into the lobby. Rahul and Manoj initially intimidated Ashlesha and her grandmother Rohini, demanding Ashlesha's ATM card and PIN in exchange for their lives. Ashlesha, hoping to be spared, quickly handed over the card. However, Rahul and Manoj were aware that they had been seen, and this posed a risk to their. To eliminate witnesses, Rahul attempted to shoot Ashlesha but accidentally shot himself in the foot instead. Manoj then took a knife and brutally murdered both Ashlesha and Rohini. After the killings, the 3 thieves, including Neha, Rahul, Manoj, stole approximately 1 million Indian rupees and valuable jewelry worth up to $500,000 rupees and Ashlesha's ATM card. Rahul, along with Neha and Manoj, had planned to use the ATM card to withdraw cash. However, their plan failed when Neha was arrested by the police. Rahul to file an untrue report at the police station and was arrested, but was later hospitalized due to gunshot wounds. The police matched Rahul's blood sample from the crime scene to one taken from him. It was a match. The police quickly solved the case and arrested the suspects. Following a prolonged and contentious court case, the 3 defendants, Neha, Rahul, Manoj, were sentenced to death by hanging in December 2013. The district court handed down this severe punishment due to the heinous nature of the crime, in which the defendants killed women from 3 generations of the Megha family. Physical evidence, including blood-stained clothing, knives, and jewelry, was recovered from the defendants by the police. One of the defendants, Neha, is currently serving her sentence in the central jail. Notably, she has been teaching a beauty parlor course to fellow female inmates while incarcerated. This case was notable for being the first time the district court had imposed a death sentence on a woman. Neha and Rahul's desire for quick wealth led them to get involved in a life of crime. It is fortunate that the perpetrators were caught. If Megha had not worn her valuable jewelry to the mall and had not trusted a stranger she met there, the outcome may have been different. Megha's husband, Nana Deshpande, was pleased with the court's decision and praised the judiciary and the police for their efforts.